Chapter 26:02. Li Tian's speed of carving the formation was fast enough. Unfortunately, the great sage of the ancients didn't give him the opportunity to do so. Li Tian's speed of carving the formation was fast enough. Unfortunately, the great sage of the ancients didn't give him the opportunity to do so. The disadvantage of a formation master was completely highlighted at this time. Given the current situation, Li Tian couldn't exert his strength at all. If they had expected this situation, any of the other palace masters of the 9 palaces above the clouds would have an easier time than Li Tian. After all, Li Tian was obviously at a disadvantage compared to them. But at the same time, if Li Tian was given enough time to carve the formation steadily, then his terrifying strength would be revealed. Unfortunately, the great sage of the ancients wouldn't give Li Tian such an opportunity. Most of the time, the great sage of the ancients would rather take Xiao Qin's attack head-on than give Li Tian a chance to carve the formation. In the great sage of the ancients' view, Li Tian's threat was far greater than Xiao Qin's, so he couldn't give Li Tian any chance. In this regard, Xiao Qin was also very helpless. He thought that his physical body was strong enough, but Xiao Qin couldn't gain the slightest advantage in front of the great sage of the ancients. After breaking through to the ancestor realm, Xiao Qin indeed had enough confidence to show disdain for all heroes. However, compared to a top expert like the great sage of the ancients, Xiao Qin was still inferior. There was an obvious gap in their foundation, which was also Xiao Qin's biggest problem at the moment. After all, the age gap between them was too big. Compared to the great sage of the ancients, the current Xiao Qin couldn't be any younger. If their ages were the same, Xiao Qin would undoubtedly be able to crush the great sage of the ancients. Unfortunately, Xiao Qin was too young. This couldn't be helped. Although Xiao Qin had spared no effort to make up for his lack of foundation through various means, the gap in time wasn't that easy to make up for. He didn't hold back, but Xiao Qin knew that the gap between him and the great sage of the ancients wasn't that easy to make up for. But fortunately, Xiao Qin and Li Tian's purpose was not to kill the great sage of the ancients. They only needed to delay him. They believed that Lin Yun must have reacted by now. She would either come in person or send reinforcements. In this way, Xiao Qin and Li Tian only needed to stall the great saint of the ancients and not give him a chance to escape. At most, the experts of the Cloud Palace would arrive in one day. Knowing this, Xiao Qin and Li Tian attacked unhurriedly. They didn't care about being suppressed by the great sage of the ancients and continued to tangle with the great sage of the ancients. The 3 of them fought fiercely, while the other cultivators of the macro worlds acted one after another to rescue the cultivators who had been trapped by the great saint of the ancients and had their flesh and souls sucked dry. These cultivators came from various forces in the large world. Of course, there were quite a few independent cultivators among them as well. When they were released one by one, their expressions all became unsightly. The bodies of these people had all become incomparably shriveled, and there was not even the slightest bit of life in them. In response, the few half-step ancestor stage experts leading the group shook their heads and said after carefully inspecting a few of them, "It's hopeless. Not to mention the destruction of their physical bodies, even their souls have been completely absorbed. If it was only the physical body that was destroyed, then by using some special means and paying a certain price, there might be a way to preserve their souls. After that, they could think of other ways to rebuild their physical bodies. But now, not only were their physical bodies destroyed, even their souls have been completely absorbed by the great sage of the ancients. It was obviously hopeless. With both the physical body and the soul dead at the same time, even a world lord couldn't save the situation." Hearing the conclusion of the few half-step progenitor experts, many of the people present looked sorrowful because many of these people were their juniors, companions, or friends. Dian book vault now that they heard such words. They must be extremely sorrowful. At the same time, their hatred for the great sage of the ancients grew stronger. For the time being, there was no time to pay attention to these matters. Xiao Qin and Li Tian were still fighting fiercely with the great sage of the ancients. The 2 of them joined forces, and the great sage of the ancients couldn't do much. Although he could gain the upper hand, he couldn't easily defeat Xiao Chun and Li Tian. This was the result that Xiao Chun and Li Tian wanted to see. As long as they weren't defeated directly, their mission would be considered completed when the experts of the Cloud Palace arrived. The fierce battle continued, and soon, more than half a day passed. The battle between the three of them was still evenly matched. As time passed, the great sage of the ancients gradually realized that something was wrong. Li Tian and Xiao Chun knew that they were no match for him, but they didn't have the slightest intention of retreating. Moreover, from the way they attacked, they didn't seem to have a strong, killing intent towards him. It was indeed strange that they didn't want to kill him, but they also didn't want to retreat. There was only one explanation for this, and that was that Xiao Chun and Li Tian were just stalling for time. After figuring this out, the great sage of the ancients' eyes turned cold. The two of them were stalling for time, waiting for the forces behind them to arrive. Although the great sage of the ancients didn't know the current situation of the macro world and was confident in his own strength, he still decided to be cautious. He didn't want to clash with the forces behind Li Tian and Xiao Chun for the time being. Sensing the intentions of the two, the great sage of the ancients angrily attacked. It was obvious that he didn't want to be entangled with Xiao Chun and Li Tian any longer and was ready to leave. Li Tian and Xiao Chun naturally wouldn't allow the great sage of the ancients to leave. The two of them immediately tried to stop him. The great sage of the ancients smiled confidently. "Do you really think that you can stop me with just the two of you?" For the time being, the great sage of the ancients couldn't do anything to them. However, if the great sage of the ancients wanted to leave, Li Tian and Xiao Chun wouldn't be able to stop him. The great sage of the ancients wasn't in the mood to continue entangling with the two of them. He was determined to leave. The pressure on Li Tian and Xiao Chun suddenly increased. It wasn't easy to stop the great sage of the ancients. Moreover, if they let the great sage of the ancients escape now, all their previous efforts would be wasted. In this regard, Xiao Chun and Li Tian used all their strength to stop the great sage of the ancients from leaving. However, the great sage of the ancients didn't care at all. As he said, Li Tian and Xiao Chun weren't enough to stop him. Seeing that the great sage of the ancients was about to break out of their encirclement, Xiao Chun and Li Tian's faces darkened. Li Tian wanted to engrave a formation to trap the great sage of the ancients, but unfortunately, it was destroyed by the great sage of the ancients before it could be completed. "I'll let the two of you go this time. Next time, I'll definitely take your lives." After successfully breaking out of the encirclement of Xiao Chun and Li Tian, the ancients laughed loudly and was about to leave. Unfortunately, just as the great sage of the ancients finished speaking, a sneer suddenly came from the sky. "Do you think you can leave?" Chapter 26:03. After breaking through Li Tian and Xiao Chen's blockade, Supreme Saint Huanggu thought that he had successfully broken out of the encirclement. However, as the voice suddenly came from the sky, Lin Yuan's figure also appeared in front of Supreme Saint Huanggu, directly blocking his way. Seeing Lin Yuan's arrival, Li Tian heaved a sigh of relief, while Supreme Sage Huanggu frowned. Supreme Sage Huanggu felt a strong threat from Lin Yuan. However, Lin Yuan was even more dangerous than Li Tian. Not only had his cultivation reached the peak of the ancestor realm, but he was also different from Li Tian, who was an array master. Lin Yuan was an expert who was born to fight. Supreme Sage Huanggu had a clear idea of how to deal with Li Tian, which was to not give him any chance to carve a formation. However, it was obviously not going to work against Lin Yuan. Supreme Sage Huanggu's eyes flashed with a hint of fear. At the same time, he was also curious about the current situation of the Great World. Also, what was the power behind Li Tian and Xiao Chun? Supreme Sage Huanggu unconsciously regarded Lin Yuan as the person behind Li Tian and the others. After all, Lin Yuan's strength was at the top in Supreme Sage Huanggu's era. However, Supreme Sage Huanggu still underestimated the Great World. Lin Yuan was not the person behind Li Tian at all. Lin Yuan's eyes gradually surged with battle intent as he stared coldly at Supreme Sage Huanggu. He was also very interested in this expert from tens of thousands of years ago. He did not know who was stronger between them. Their cultivation levels were similar. Moreover, Lin Yuan felt a strong blood qi from Supreme Sage Huanggu's body. Needless to say, Supreme Sage Huanggu was also a cultivator with an extremely strong physical body. Lin Yuan sneered as his battle intense soared. "You won't be able to leave today." As soon as he finished speaking, Lin Yuan took a step forward and instantly appeared in front of Supreme Sage Huanggu. Then, he threw out a punch. Supreme Sage Huanggu did not dare to be careless and threw out a punch of his own. The two collided head-on, and the terrifying aftermath of the battle instantly swept across the sky. As he watched the two of them fight, Li Tian, who was standing at the side, decided to start drawing the array. However, just as Li Tian was about to act, Lin Yuan suddenly spoke up. "Don't interfere. Let me deal with him." Lin Yuan was a typical battle maniac. Now that he had encountered such a good opponent like the Supreme Sage of the Ancients, he naturally didn't want Li Tian to intervene. Upon hearing Lin Yuan's words, Li Tian smiled helplessly. However, he immediately gave up on the idea of intervening. Although Lin Yuan would definitely win if he intervened, Li Tian had no reason to refuse since Lin Yuan wanted to fight the Supreme Sage of the Ancients. Moreover, Li Tian knew why Lin Yuan was acting this way because Supreme Sage Huanggu's fighting style was very similar. First of all, both of them had strong physical bodies. At the same time, they only relied on their pair of iron fists to fight. Fist against fist, there was nothing fancy. It could be said that Lin Yuan and Supreme Sage Huanggu's fighting style was almost the same. In Lin Yuan's opinion, Supreme Sage Huanggu was undoubtedly the most suitable opponent for him. This time, neither of them had the upper hand. Supreme Sage Huanggu could not do it so easily in front of Lin Yuan. Lin Yuan's strength, especially his frontal combat strength, was definitely far superior to Xiao Chun and Li Tian. That was fun. Come again. Lin Yuan was not discouraged when he failed to gain the upper hand. Instead, he laughed heartily and looked extremely excited. Having said that, Lin Yuan launched a ferocious attack. Just like the great sage of the ancients, Lin Yuan was not only strong, but he was also extremely fast. 139 Chinese under Lin Yuan's continuous punches, the sky was already covered with fist radiance. At this moment, the fist radiance was like a flood rushing toward Supreme Sage Huanggu. Supreme Sage Huanggu did not dare to be careless in the face of Lin Yuan's attack. He felt a real threat from Lin Yan. He knew that Lin Yan's strength was not weaker than his. He had to be cautious. Without hesitation, Supreme Sage Huanggu attacked directly. The two of them immediately engaged in a fierce battle in the sky. Watching the battle between Lin Yuan and Supreme Sage Huanggu, the crowd finally understood what it meant to be punched to the flesh. There were no fancy moves. Every punch seemed ordinary, but the power was astonishing. The space had long collapsed, but to the two of them, it was as if they did not feel it at all. They did not have the slightest intention of stopping. The great sage of the ancients was the best opponent, in his opinion. The great sage of the ancients was getting more and more apprehensive as the fight went on. He had thought that he had taken Lin Yuan seriously enough, but who would have thought that Lin Yuan's strength would be much stronger than he had imagined after exchanging blows with him? Supreme Sage Huanggu did not have the confidence to defeat Lin Yuan with such strength. However, Lin Yuan did not care about this now. He was already in the mood to fight. How would he care about these things? The more he fought, the braver and more excited he became. Lin Yuan's punches also became faster and stronger. Naturally, Supreme Sage Huanggu's pressure was also increasing. It was obvious that Lin Yuan was very excited. However, Great Sage Huanggu had no intention of fighting Lin Yuan to the death. Unfortunately, Lin Yuan had no intention of letting him go so easily. Both of them were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, they had exchanged thousands of blows. The sky seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. As time went by, Lin Yuan began to gradually suppress Supreme Sage Huanggu. However, Lin Yuan seemed to be dissatisfied with this. He said coldly to Supreme Sage Huanggu, "Is this all the strength of the experts from tens of thousands of years ago?" It was as if he felt that Supreme Sage Huanggu was too weak for him to enjoy the fight. Supreme Sage Huanggu's face darkened, and he shouted coldly, "You're courting death." Supreme Sage Huanggu was indeed not in the mood to fight Lin Yuan to the death. However, judging from the current situation, it would be difficult for him to leave today if he did not defeat Lin Yuan. With this thought, Supreme Sage Huanggu made up his mind. He stopped thinking about other things and fought Lin Yuan with all his strength. Ancient War Body. Supreme Sage Huanggu shouted in a low voice. A faint yellow light began to emerge from his body. The Ancient War Body was not a special physique. It was a body refining technique, similar to Shao Qin's tempered battle body. It was also Supreme Sage Huanggu's famous consummate skill. Supreme Sage Huanggu was able to become one of the top experts in that era by relying on the terrifying Ancient War Body. At this time, Supreme Sage Huanggu's body seemed to have undergone a complete transformation. He seemed to have turned into a human-shaped Tyrannosaurus. Chapter 2604. After displaying the battle body of the ancients, the strength of the Supreme Sage of the ancients was significantly enhanced. However, this was not the end of it. As the yellow light became denser, the Supreme Sage of the ancients' body continued to expand. After displaying the battle body of the ancients, the Supreme Sage of the ancients' strength was significantly enhanced. However, this was not the end of it. As the yellow light became denser, the Supreme Sage of the ancients' body continued to expand. It was as if a layer of huge armor had formed around his body. In the blink of an eye, the Supreme Sage of the ancients had turned into a giant that was hundreds of meters tall. This was the true strength of the Supreme Sage of the ancients. Looking at the mountain-like Supreme Sage of the ancients, everyone present was dumbfounded. Lin Yuan, on the other hand, smiled excitedly. Now this is interesting. It could be seen that the current Supreme Sage of the ancients was far more powerful than before. Not only had his body expanded, but his strength and speed had also improved qualitatively. However, Lin Yuan had not shown his full strength. As the Supreme Sage of the ancients turned into a giant, Lin Yuan also returned to his original form. Among the 9 palace masters of the 9 palaces above the clouds, Lin Yuan and Lin, who were both demonic beasts. Lin Yuan's original form was a demonic ape. The demonic ape could be said to be a demonic beast that was almost extinct. However, it was a natural divine beast. Any demonic ape could tear the ancestral dragon apart as long as it grew up. This showed how powerful the demonic ape was. In the blink of an eye, Lin Yuan's body became as huge as a mountain. He was not inferior to the Supreme Sage of the ancients. At the same time, after returning to his original form, Lin Yuan's aura became unusually violent. His eyes were blood red, like a peerless beast. Looking at Lin Yuan, the Supreme Sage of the ancients' heart sank. Lin Yuan was actually a demonic ape. However, before he could think further, Lin Yuan took the initiative to launch an attack. A huge fist blasted out fiercely. This punch was enough to destroy a city. The loud sound of the air breaking resounded through the sky. Facing Lin Yuan's attack, the Supreme Sage of the ancients did not dare to be careless. He immediately counterattacked. The 2 giants collided head-on, causing the earth to shake. Seeing this, Li Tian said to Shao Chun, "Stay away." With the current destructive power of these 2 guys, it was better not to get close to them. Although Shao Chun and Li Tian were not injured by the aftermath of the battle, there was no need for them to intervene. It was meaningless to intervene in the battle between these 2 monsters. Upon hearing Li Tian's words, Shao Chun nodded noncommittally. Then he, Li Tian, and the others retreated a distance, leaving space for Supreme Saint Huanggu and Lin Yuan. A fist collided head-on, and the strength of this fist was far from what the previous one could compare to. The strength was so great that it made people dumbfounded. Shao Chun had also witnessed with his own eyes how strong the combat prowess of a peak progenitor was. It was no exaggeration to say that the gap between him and Lin Yuan and the great saint of the ancients was still very large. They could not be compared at all. When the fist blasted out, the space directly collapsed. The terrifying void storm raged wildly. The void storm was like countless sharp blades, but it had no effect in front of Lin Yuan and the Supreme Sage of the ancients. Both of them ignored the void storm. At the same time, as the fist landed, Lin Yuan did not give the supreme sage of the ancients any chance to catch his breath. He immediately leaped up and engaged in a fierce battle with the supreme sage of the ancients. Looking at the fierce battle between the two, Li Tian did not look too worried. He was well aware of Lin Yuan's strength. No matter how strong the supreme sage of the ancients was, he could at most be evenly matched with Lin Yuan. It was impossible for him to pose a threat to Lin Yuan. The #1 expert of the 9 palaces above the clouds was not a title for nothing. Lin Yuan's combat strength was definitely at the top of the progenitor realm. Gong Nantian of the Immortal Palace, Missouri he of the Demon Abyss, Xieqing Tian of the Heretical Sect. These were all famous experts, but without exception, they were all afraid of Lin Yuan. Moreover, Mo He and Xieqing Tian had suffered a great loss in the hands of Lin Yuan. Therefore, Li Tian was not worried about Lin Yuan. The only thing Li Tian needed to do now was to prevent the supreme sage of the ancients from escaping. As long as he did not give the supreme sage of the ancients a chance to escape, Lin Yuan could kill him. The two's fighting styles were indeed the same. There was nothing fancy about it. It was the most direct and primitive way of fighting, relying on their pair of iron fists. Their huge bodies did not affect their speed. On the contrary, their speed was much faster than before. The sky was filled with fist shadows, making it impossible for people to see the tricks of their fists. Such a battle left many experts of the great world stunned. Many of them had never seen a battle of this level in their lives. In their eyes, Lin Yuan and the supreme sage of the ancients were like two celestial emperors fighting fiercely. The sky was falling apart because of the battle, and the earth was cracking inch by inch. This was a battle between real experts. It was not an exaggeration to say that the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. The battle had reached its climax. Lin Yuan and the supreme sage of the ancients were completely immersed in the battle. They had no intention of paying attention to what was happening in the outside world. Such a breathtaking battle made everyone unable to take their eyes off it. At the same time, Lin Yun was sitting with Lu Bingning and chatting. As Lin Yun's wife, Lu Bingning was naturally deeply trusted by Lin Yun. She also knew about the supreme sage of the ancients. At this time, while making tea for Lin Yun, Lu Bingning asked faintly, "Is it okay to let Lin Yuan go alone? Don't you need Lin Hu and the others to support him?" Naturally, she had heard of the supreme sage of the ancients. She also knew that the supreme sage of the ancients was an expert who had been famous for many years. His cultivation was definitely at the peak of the ancestor realm. It could be said that he was almost on par with Lin Yuan. Therefore, Lu Bingning was still worried that Lin Yuan would struggle to take down the supreme sage of the ancients by himself. However, when she heard this, Lin Yun smiled slightly and said confidently, "Times have changed. It is no longer the era of the supreme sage of the ancients. Don't worry, Lin Yuan alone is enough. Besides, isn't there Li Tian? With Li Tian around, the supreme sage of the ancients won't be able to escape." Lin Yun had never taken the supreme sage of the ancients seriously. This was also the reason why Lin Yun didn't take action personally. Although the supreme sage of the ancients might have mastered some kind of secret technique that could allow him to break through the ancestor realm and become the lord of the world, Lin Yun felt that these things were just evil methods. Lin Yun didn't care and wasn't interested in these things. She was satisfied as long as she killed the supreme sage of the ancients. Looking at Lin Yun's confident face, Lu Bingning smiled slightly and said, "You are very confident. Of course, the current great world belongs to me, Lin Yun. The era of the supreme sage of the ancients has long passed." In response, Lin Yun said with a smile, "Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 2605. Lin Yun was not worried about the great saint of the ancients at all. She did not think that the great saint of the ancients could pose any threat to her. This was the confidence of the Cloud Palace Master. Hearing this, Lu Bingning smiled slightly and did not say anything else. She directly handed a cup of tea to Lin Yun. Lin Yun was not worried about the great saint of the ancients at all. She did not think that the great saint of the ancients could pose any threat to her. This was the confidence of the Cloud Palace Master. Hearing this, Lu Bingning smiled slightly and did not say anything else. She directly handed a cup of tea to Lin Yun. Lin Yun was now the only king of the macro world. No one could challenge her majesty. As for the great saint of the ancients, who had been dead for tens of thousands of years, it would be strange if he could pose a threat to Lin Yun with a casual move. It also showed that Lin Yun was not qualified to be the master of the Cloud Palace. Lin Yun did not think much about the outcome of the matter. In her opinion, it was already predestined. The great saint of the ancients could not achieve anything. Lin Yun was full of confidence. In the ruins, the fierce battle between Lin Yuan and the great saint of the ancients continued. Both of them did not hold back at all. However, as time passed, the great saint of the ancients gradually fell into a disadvantage. The more he fought, the more shocked he became. The great saint of the ancients had never met anyone whose physical body was comparable to Lin Yuan's. Originally, the great saint of the ancients was full of confidence in his physical body. However, after meeting Lin Yuan, the great saint of the ancients realized that Lin Yuan was superior to him in terms of physical body. The great saint of the ancients, who was famous for his physical body, lost to another person in terms of physical body. The great saint of the ancients found it hard to accept. At the same time, he began to wonder what was going on in the macro world. His heart was heavy. On the other hand, Lin Yuan was completely different. The more he fought, the more excited he became. He did not care about the changes in the great saint of the ancients at all. His attacks were like tidal waves that rushed towards the great saint of the ancients. He did not give the great saint of the ancients any chance to breathe. At this point, Supreme Sage Huanggu was already thinking of retreating. He didn't want to continue fighting with Lin Yuan. After paying such a huge price, the great sage of the ancients finally came back to life. It was all for the position of the Lord of the world, not to fight to the death with Lin Yuan. And looking at the current situation, it was obviously not good for the great sage of the ancients to continue fighting. Thinking of retreating, Supreme Sage Huanggu began to look for an opportunity to escape. However, he failed to hide his thoughts from Lin Yuan and Li Tian. Before Supreme Sage Huanggu could escape, Li Tian had already set up a formation that enveloped both Supreme Sage Huanggu and Lin Yuan. Supreme Sage Huanggu's face darkened when he realized that he was enveloped by a formation. Lin Yuan shouted coldly, "Don't you think you're too naive to think that you can leave now?" Li Tian had not made a move. On one hand, it was because of Lin Yuan's request. On the other hand, it was to prevent the great saint of the ancients from escaping. After all, with Supreme Sage Huanggu's strength, if he wanted to escape, Lin Yuan alone would not be able to stop him. However, it was completely different with Li Tian by his side. Without the disturbance from the outside world, Li Tian had enough time to set up the formation. He might not be able to kill the great saint of the ancients with the formation, but at least it would not be a problem to trap him. From the beginning, he did not give the great saint of the ancients any chance to escape. Hearing Lin Yuan's words, Supreme Sage Huanggu's face turned completely gloomy. At the same time, for the first time, Supreme Sage Huanggu felt the threat of death. There was no way to escape. If he continued to fight to the death, the situation would only become worse for him. There was no doubt about it. As for Lin Yuan, he did not care so much. Lin Yun's order was to kill the great saint of the ancients. Lin Yuan naturally would not show any mercy. His attacks did not decrease, but instead became even more ferocious. He attacked the great saint of the ancients without any explanation. Must read, Room Supreme Sage Huanggu found it increasingly difficult to resist Lin Yuan's attacks. Cracks began to appear on the giant body formed by the golden light. Apparently, it was showing signs of collapse. It seems that your war body of the ancients can't hold on any longer. Seeing the cracks spreading, Lin Yuan threw a punch and sneered. Hearing Lin Yuan's words, the great saint of the ancients did not reply. His face was cold. He naturally felt that his war body of the ancients was on the verge of collapse, but there was nothing he could do. There was no way he could escape. In terms of strength, he was not as strong as Lin Yuan. If it was a one-on-one battle, the great saint of the ancients would not be worried. If he could not defeat Lin Yuan, he could run away. But now, there was the formation master Li Tian on the side. Escaping had become impossible. Since he could not escape, he could only bite the bullet and fight Lin Yuan fiercely. Such a fierce battle would only become more and more strenuous as time passed. The originally small gap in strength between the two sides would continue to widen as time passed. There was not much time for the great saint of the ancients to think of a countermeasure. Lin Yuan threw a punch and collided with the great saint of the ancients. Along with the collision, one of the great saint of the ancients' arms was directly blown off by Lin Yuan. The battle body of the ancients was broken by Lin Yuan right there, and then Lin Yuan did not stop at all after landing a hit and threw another punch. This time, the supreme saint of the ancients found it even more difficult to resist and had no choice but to take Lin Yuan's punch head-on. As a result, the war body of the ancients, which was already on the verge of collapse, was directly blasted apart. The originally huge body also collapsed inch by inch in an instant. With the war body of the ancients destroyed, the great saint of the ancients' body appeared in front of everyone again. However, at this moment, the great saint of the ancients had blood on the corner of his mouth, and his breath was extremely weak. It was obvious that he was seriously injured. The great saint of the ancients was particularly confident in his strength before, but who would have thought that he would be defeated just like that? Moreover, he was defeated by Lin Yuan in a direct confrontation. The great saint of the ancients was shocked that his war body of the ancients had been forcibly shattered by Lin Yuan. However, before he could react, Lin Yuan's fist had already descended from the sky and pressed down on the great saint of the ancients with the force of a mountain. The great saint of the ancients felt that the sky had turned dark. He looked up and saw a huge fist descending from the sky and slamming down on him. Without the war body of the ancients, the great saint of the ancients did not think that he could withstand Lin Yuan's punch. A look of fear appeared in his eyes, unconsciously. The great saint of the ancients could not help but say, "Stop. I can teach you a secret technique that will allow you to break through the ancestor realm and become the lord of the world." The great saint of the ancients was indeed afraid in the face of death. He was even willing to use a secret technique to escape from Lin Yuan. In his opinion, no one would be able to resist the temptation of breaking through to the ancestor realm. Unfortunately, it was useless against Lin Yuan because only one world lord of the macro world was enough, and that person was Lin Yan. Therefore, Lin Yuan did not hesitate in the face of the great saint of the ancients begging for mercy. His iron fist landed heavily on the great saint of the ancients' body. Immediately, the great saint of the ancients was blasted down from the sky, and his physical body was shattered. Chapter 26:06. Lin Yuan didn't care about what the great sage of the ancients said. Regardless of whether Lin Yuan was willing to break through to the progenitor realm, he would never betray Lin Yan. Lin Yuan didn't care about what the great sage of the ancients said. Regardless of whether Lin Yuan was willing to break through to the progenitor realm, he would never betray Lin Yan. If the price of breaking through to the progenitor realm was to betray Lin Yan, Lin Yuan wouldn't even consider it. Their relationship was as deep as Xiao Chen's, Xin Yuanling's, and Long Qing's. Lin Yuan's punch directly shattered the great sage of the ancients' body. Without the ancients' war body, the great sage of the ancients couldn't withstand Lin Yuan's all-out punch. Lin Yuan didn't hold back at all on this punch. He even maintained his original state. Such a powerful punch, coupled with the great sage of the ancients' current state, was naturally difficult to block. The great sage of the ancients' body was directly shattered. However, the great sage of the ancients was still an expert at the peak of the progenitor realm. Even if he lost his body, he wouldn't be disappointed. At least his spirit was still intact. Smoke and dust rose as the great sage of the ancient spirit was destroyed once again. A cold light flashed in the eyes of the great sage of the ancient spirit, but he didn't dare to stay for long. He planned to take advantage of the chaos to escape. As for the spirit of the ancients, he could just reforge a new body in the future. Unfortunately, the idea was beautiful, but the reality was often cruel. Before the great sage of the ancients could escape, Lin Yuan had already grabbed his spirit. The great sage of the ancients panicked when he was caught by Lin Yuan. Unfortunately, he couldn't break free from Lin Yuan's control. "Do you think I'll give you a chance to escape?" Lin Yuan said coldly as he looked at the great sage of the ancients who was constantly struggling in his hand. As soon as he finished speaking, Lin Yuan exerted force and crushed the great sage of the ancient spirit. The great sage of the ancients' body and spirit were destroyed. The great sage of the ancients could be said to have completely disappeared from the world. After the battle ended, everyone unconsciously heaved a sigh of relief. Xiao Chen immediately went to the dried corpses and began to search for traces of Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing. There was an unconcealable look of worry on his face. If something really happened to Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing, to be honest, Xiao Chen did not know what he would do. Xiao Chen kept praying in his heart that everything was fine. As he searched, the expression on his face became more and more anxious. He did not find Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing. This was good news, but it also made Xiao Chen even more worried, until Xiao Chen heard Long Qing's voice behind him. "Little brother." Xiao Chen suddenly turned his head and saw Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing in the crowd. The two of them and a few other people had successfully escaped the disaster and hid in the secret realm. It was not until the battle ended that everyone rushed over. Seeing that Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing were safe and sound, Xiao Chen was stunned for a moment. Then he was overjoyed. In a flash, he appeared in front of the two of them and hugged them tightly without any explanation. He said sincerely, "It's good that you're fine." Xiao Chen indeed felt like he had survived a disaster. Previously, he thought that something had happened to Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing, but in the end, the two of them were fine. Looking at Xiao Chen's worried look, Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing smiled slightly. They were lucky. Otherwise, they would have been dead by now. After hugging each other for a moment, Long Qing looked at Xiao Chen's worried look and could not help but tease him. "Little brother, are you that worried about us? At least give us some confidence." Long Qing's teasing also made Xiao Chen's mood unconsciously better. The main thing was that the two of them were fine. This made Xiao Chen completely relieved. The biggest stone in his heart had been lifted. However, Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, Li Chun, Dan Xian, and the others were not so lucky. Previously, Xiao Chen had already noticed them among the many mummies. However, at that time, Xiao Chen was worried about Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing, so he did not pay much attention to them. After all, compared to Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing, Dao Ju and the others were obviously inferior in Xiao Chen's heart. Now that Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing were fine, Xiao Chen's gaze once again fell on Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and the others. At the same time, Lin Yuan and Li Tian also came to Xiao Chen's side. Along the way, the experts greeted them one after another, and the two of them simply nodded in response. At this moment, looking at Dao Ju and the others in front of Xiao Chen, Li Tian frowned slightly. After personally inspecting them, he shook his head helplessly and said, "Their flesh and soul have been sucked dry." Sigh. Although he did not say it explicitly, it was not difficult to understand from Li Tian's words that it was probably hopeless. After all, even their spiritual power was gone, so it was impossible to save them. Upon hearing his words, Xiao Chen was still unwilling to give up. "Palace Master, is there no way to save them?" Li Tian and the others were helpless, but Lin Yun was the ruler of the world, so Xiao Chen still held onto a trace of hope. Besides, Xiao Chen didn't wish for Dao Ju and the others to perish just like that. If there was a way to save Xiao Chen, he would definitely spare no effort to think of a way. But after hearing Xiao Chen's words, Li Tian shook his head and said, "It's useless. If their souls hadn't dissipated, perhaps there would still be a way." But now, Li Tian didn't finish a sentence, but it was obvious that even if the Cloud Palace and Lin Yun were to take action, they wouldn't be able to defy the heavens. After hearing Li Tian's conclusion, Xiao Chen couldn't help but feel a little upset. Although Xianyuan Ling and Long Qing were fine, Dao Ju and the others couldn't be saved. Xiao Chen naturally didn't feel good about it. It was especially so for Xiao Xiao, who was close to Xiao Chun and could be considered as his senior sister. But now, he couldn't save her at all. Everyone was in the same situation. Their flesh, blood, and spiritual power were all absorbed by the great sage of the ancients. Even the gods couldn't save them. Upon hearing Li Tian and Xiao Chen's words, the powerful beings in the surroundings sulked. Many of them were their juniors and friends. Now that they couldn't be saved, it was only natural that they were heartbroken. But while everyone was inwardly grieving, pillars of blood descended from the sky all of a sudden. The flesh power that was absorbed by the great sage of the ancients was once again infused into their bodies. Everyone was stunned by this sudden change. Then, Li Tian and Lin Yuan revealed looks of joy. Perhaps this is the flesh and blood of the great sage of the ancients returning to his body after his death, Li Tian said with a smile. After the great sage of the ancients died, the flesh power that was absorbed by him returned to everyone's bodies. This was obviously a good thing. Even Lin Yuan said indifferently, seizing the flesh and blood of others in order to revive oneself. This kind of crooked path is ultimately not the right path. Now that he's dead, it could be considered as returning to his rightful owner. Lin Yuan obviously looked down on the great sage of the ancients' methods. It might sound heaven-defying, but in fact, the price to pay for it was definitely not low. Lin Yuan wasn't interested in such methods. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend me. Chapter 26:07. As the pillars of blood fell from the sky, the power of flesh and blood continuously entered everyone's bodies. Soon, the people who had turned into dried corpses quickly recovered. The power of flesh and blood had been forcibly seized by the great sage of the ancients. Now that it had returned to everyone's bodies, it could be considered as returning to its rightful owner. Of course, this was also because the great sage of the ancients had not completely refined and integrated it. To put it bluntly, when the great sage of the ancients absorbed everyone's flesh and blood, it was more like a robbery. However, the flesh and blood did not completely fuse with his body. Now that the great sage of the ancients was killed, the flesh and blood naturally returned to their respective owners. Moreover, as the power of flesh and blood continued to flow into everyone's bodies, the power of soul also followed. Originally, they were still thinking about how to save these people, but now it seemed that there was no need to worry. Who would have thought that the great sage of the ancient secret technique would have such an obvious drawback? That's all. There's nothing to worry about. Looking at the return of the power of flesh and soul, Li Tian said with a smile. Xiao Chun was also completely relieved. Looking at Dao Ju, and Xiao Zhao's bodies returning to normal, Xiao Chun was also completely relieved. Looking at the current situation, it would not take long for them to wake up. This was indeed great news. After all, everyone was still worried before, but now all the problems were solved. Sure enough, as the pillars of blood in the sky disappeared one after another, Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and the others woke up again. They looked around blankly and saw that Xiao Chun was also present. Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and the others looked puzzled. Brother Xiao Chun, why are you here? None of them seemed to remember much about what had happened before. Xiao Chun only briefly explained what had happened. It was only after that everyone gradually began to recall what had happened. Originally, they entered the ruins to see if they could obtain the inheritance of the great sage of the ancients or some other opportunities. Who would have thought that all this was a trap set by the great sage of the ancients? Fortunately, Xiao Chun and the others had arrived in time. Otherwise, they would have been in real danger. Thinking of this, everyone could not help but feel a lingering fear. Fortunately, it was a close call in the end. This allowed everyone to heave a sigh of relief. Seeing that everyone was fine, they searched around the ruins again. Since they didn't find anything valuable, they didn't stay any longer and left the ruins. Outside the ruins, Xiao Chun looked at Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and the others and asked, I plan to return to the Cloud Palace. What do you think? Do you want to continue training, or do you want to come with me? Xiao Chun had no intention of continuing to train. After all, With Xiao Qian's current level of cultivation, there was no point in training in the large world. It was better for him to return to the Cloud Palace. Hearing Xiao Qian's words, Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and the others replied straightforwardly, "Let's train for a while more." None of them wanted to return to the Cloud Palace. Firstly, they felt uncomfortable in the Cloud Palace. Secondly, they didn't receive the same treatment as Xiao Chun. The Cloud Palace and Lin Yun obviously wouldn't waste too many resources on them. This was human nature. After all, Lin Yun treated Xiao Chun well, because Xiao Chun had the potential to become the world lord of the Great Thousand World. It didn't mean that Lin Yun was a good person. Therefore, rather than returning to the Cloud Palace, they were more willing to train in the large world. After all, during this period of time, they had made great progress in the large world and gained a lot. Reading Book Room after hearing their answers, Xiao Chun didn't force them. He nodded and reminded them to be careful. If they needed any help, they could contact him. Then, he rushed back to the Cloud Palace with Xianyuan Ling, Long Qing, Li Tian, and Lin Yuan. The matter of the great saint of the ancients was resolved perfectly. It didn't even cause too much of a stir in the large world. After all, this was no longer the era of the great saint of the ancients. It was impossible for the great saint of the ancients to be resurrected and break through to the ancestor realm. Lin Yun and the Cloud Palace's ruling power in the large world was unquestionable. At least in the large world, there was no possibility of shaking the foundation of the Cloud Palace. The matter of the great saint of the ancients was like a flash in the pan. It had ended before he could even walk out of his own ruins. After returning to the Cloud Palace safely, Xiao Chun, Long Qing, and Xianyuan Ling returned to their residence together. When they saw that Long Qing and Xianyuan Ling were fine, Qin Shu, Fairy of 100 Flowers, and the others breathed a sigh of relief. At first, when they heard that Long Qing and Xianyuan Ling had been born, Qin Shu and the others were worried. Now that they had returned safely, it was a perfect outcome. That night, everyone gathered together to drink and chat. Long Qing asked Lin Yun, "Little brother, when are we going back to the Great Thousand World?" It had been a long time since they followed Lin Yun to the large world. Now that Xiao Chun had broken through to the ancestor realm, it was about time to return to the Great Thousand World. In response, Xiao Chun nodded slightly and said, "It's about time. Let's wait a little longer. When the time comes, we'll call Dao Ju and the others and leave together." Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, and the others were still training. Xiao Chun planned to leave with them. Since everyone had come together, it was naturally impossible to leave them behind. Upon hearing Xiao Chen's words, Long Qing and Xianyuan Ling did not say much. They drank until late at night before everyone dispersed. Early the next morning, Xiao Chun had just started cultivating when he was summoned by Lin Yun. He did not know why Lin Yun had summoned him, but Xiao Chun still went to Lin Yun's residence, as he was told. Upon seeing Xiao Chun, Lin Yun said with a smile, "I heard that you came back yesterday, so I sent someone to invite you over today." After spending some time together, Lin Yun and Xiao Chun had become familiar with each other. Moreover, Lin Yun had obviously always treated Xiao Chun as an equal. Perhaps in Lin Yun's opinion, Xiao Chun would definitely become the world master of the Great Thousand World in the future. Therefore, it was only a matter of time, and there was no need to be so calculative. Upon hearing Lin Yun's words, Xiao Chun smiled and nodded. Then, he sat down opposite Lin Yun and personally made a pot of tea for Xiao Chun. Lin Yun said faintly, "Have you heard of the Origin World?" Origin World? Xiao Chun shook his head when he heard that. He had never heard of the primordial world and knew nothing about it. Lin Yun wasn't surprised when he heard that and continued to speak. "The Origin World is already a secret of a universe. I didn't tell you before because your cultivation was still lacking. However, Xiao Chun, now that you've broken through to the ancestor realm, I can tell you some things in advance so that you can be prepared." Chapter 26:08. Lin Yun had asked Xiao Chun to come today to tell him about the Origin World. The reason why she hadn't told him before was that Xiao Chen's cultivation base was too weak at that time. Without reaching the ancestor realm, he wasn't qualified to come in contact with the Origin World. He wasn't even qualified to cross the threshold of the origin world. Lin Yun had asked Xiao Chun to come today to tell him about the origin world. The reason why she hadn't told him before was that Xiao Chen's cultivation base was too weak at that time. Without reaching the ancestor realm, he wasn't qualified to come in contact with the origin world. He wasn't even qualified to cross the threshold of the origin world. Now, Xiao Chun had successfully broken through to the ancestor realm. Although he had just entered the ancestor realm, he already had the minimum qualification. In addition, Xiao Chun would become the world master of the Great Thousand World in the future. Therefore, it wouldn't be bad for Xiao Chun to learn about the origin world in advance. He had never heard of the origin world and didn't know anything about it. However, looking at Lin Yun's serious face, Xiao Chun gathered his thoughts and listened attentively. Seeing Xiao Chen's serious expression, Lin Yun nodded slightly and said, "The origin world can be said to be the origin of thousands of universes. Xiao Chun, have you ever thought about how these universes were formed? The Great Thousand World, the Great Demon World, and the Hongmeng World." Xiao Chun had never thought about how these universes were formed. Seeing Xiao Chun shake his head, Lin Yun continued slowly. Before the universes were formed, there was nothing in the world. There was no life, no continents, and not even an endless starry sky. During that period, the only place that was born was the origin world. The origin world is the origin of all universes and life. It gave birth to thousands of universes. Hearing Lin Yun's words, Xiao Chun was shocked. The origin of thousands of universes. Just this fact alone was enough to shock people. However, that wasn't the most important thing. The true reason why the origin world had always stood above the myriad of universes was because of the old monsters in the origin world. As the first place where life was born, the old monsters in the origin world were called the ancestors. They were the first batch of creatures in this universe. They weren't humans, demons, or beasts. They were self-contained life forms. When they were born, they had advantages that no one else could compare with. It could be said that they were the true darlings of heaven and earth. In other words, they were the true heirs of heaven and earth. As for the creatures in the universe, to put it bluntly, they were all their descendants. Whether it was the human race, the demon race, the celestial race, the god race, the beast race, or other races, they were all their descendants. The origin realm had created thousands of universes, and the ancestors had created billions of creatures. Therefore, the origin realm had always had a transcendent status among the thousands of universes. Since ancient times, no matter how strong a universe was or how many experts it had never been able to escape the control of the origin realm and the ancestors. Although the origin realm rarely interfered with the affairs of the thousands of universes, and many universes hadn't even come in contact with the origin realm had always controlled everything in a place you couldn't see. This was very frightening. In a place where you couldn't see, a pair of invisible hands had been covering you from beginning to end. Yet, you didn't know about it at all and were enjoying yourself. Moreover, the ancestors of the origin realm had set up a threshold. It was the threshold to come in contact with the origin realm. Any universe that wanted to come in contact with the origin realm had to meet a condition. It had to have a world lord. Only a universe that had a world lord could come in contact with the origin realm. This was also why no one in the Great Thousand World knew about the existence of the origin realm. To put it bluntly, the Great Thousand World wasn't qualified to meet the condition set by the ancestors. The benefactors controlled everything. However, the origin realm wasn't without factions. There were two major forces in the entire origin realm. One was the Righteous Path Alliance, and the other was the Dark Era. These two factions had been opposing each other since the beginning. If one wanted to trace back to the origin, it could be traced back to the birth of all creatures. The benefactors of the Righteous Path Alliance had created the Human Clan, the Heavenly Clan, and the God Clan. They believed that humans were born good and all creatures should be kind and harmonious. On the other hand, the ancestors of the Dark Era had created the Demon Clan, the Beast Clan, the Ghost Clan, and so on. They believed that the strong were respected and they would do anything to achieve their goals. Therefore, the two factions had been opposing each other since the beginning. It was because of the different ideologies of the ancestors. There was no room for reconciliation. Because of this, the alliance of the righteous path and the dark epoch had always been fighting both openly and covertly. Neither side was willing to back down. As a result, the universe was basically divided into two camps. For example, the Great World and the Hongmeng World belonged to the Righteous Path Alliance because the human clan was the master of these two universes. On the other hand, universes like the Great Devil World belonged to the Dark Era because the master of their world was the Demon Clan. The two factions had been opposing each other since birth. This was something that couldn't be changed. Both sides wanted to implement their own ideologies completely. Because of this, the Great Thousand World was now in the eye of the storm. The Righteous Path Alliance wanted the Human Clan and the God Clan to become the world master of the Great Thousand World. Obviously, the Dark Era wasn't willing to see such an outcome. Therefore, the Righteous Path Alliance and the ancestors of the Dark Era started to fight around the Great Thousand World. Whether it was the Great World, the Hongmeng World, the Great Devil World, or Lin Yun, Mu Lingxian, or Mo Lin, they were just chess pieces in the battle between the ancestors. Of course, Xiao Chun was also a chess piece. However, he was a smaller chess piece. Of course, given the current situation of the Great Thousand World, the Righteous Path Alliance definitely had a certain advantage. This was because Xiao Chun was the most likely person to become the world master of the Great Thousand World. Therefore, the ancestors of the Righteous Path Alliance asked Lin Yun and Mu Lingxian to do everything possible to help Xiao Chun so that Xiao Chun could truly become the world master of the Great Thousand World. However, the Dark Era wouldn't sit back and do nothing. They would definitely think of a way to solve the current situation. They might support someone to compete with Xiao Chun, or they might use other means. It was more likely that they would rather die than live in dishonor. To put it bluntly, if the Dark Era couldn't find a way to solve the situation in the end, they might not hesitate to destroy the entire Great Thousand World. They wouldn't let the Righteous Path Alliance have their way. Therefore, the situation of Xiao Chun and the Great Thousand World would become more and more dangerous in the future. To put it bluntly, Lin Yun's role in the matter had risen to the level of the Origin World. This was because the ancestors weren't people that Lin Yun could compete with. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 2609. It could be said that the progenitors of the children of the heavens and earth possessed an advantage that ordinary people could not hope to reach since they were born. It could be said that they did not need to cultivate to become peerless experts of the world. Moreover, their compatibility with the world's spiritual energy had reached a perfect level. Moreover, every single one of these progenitors had lived for an unknown number of years. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they lived as long as the heavens. Therefore, even though Lin Yun was the master of the world, there was still a huge gap between her and these progenitors. To put it bluntly, such a gap was more like a gap in the level of life. It was destined from birth. Xiao Chun fell silent after Lin Yun finished explaining the origin world. The origin of the world, the ancestor of all life. Every word Lin Yun said brought great shock to Xiao Chun. Of course, Lin Yun did not say all this simply to introduce the origin world to Xiao Chun. Instead, she wanted to tell Xiao Chun that what he needed to pay attention to next was the time when the old fellows of the origin world would definitely not give up so easily, especially the Dark Age. According to Lin Yun's guess, it was impossible for the other universes to interfere with the matters of the Great Thousand Worlds. This was because the Demon Abyss and Evil Sect had returned in defeat after Immortal Palace and Cloud Palace had interfered. In this way, the Dark Age should have given up on this path and might instead support some people to compete with Xiao Chun for the position of Master of the World. Once the matter developed to this point, the Cloud Palace and Immortal Palace would not be able to interfere directly. Therefore, Lin Yun had strongly hoped that Xiao Chun would break through to the progenitor realm as soon as possible. After all, Only then would Shao Chun have the ability to compete with those people for the position of master of the world. While Lin Yun explained the origin world to Shao Chun, the progenitors of the Righteous Path Alliance had gathered in the origin world. Their figures were still hazy and illusory, so it was impossible to see their appearances clearly. They sat together in a circle. When they were still alive, a figure shrouded in black mist slowly appeared. This person came from the Dark Age. He was the progenitor of the Dark Age. The progenitors of the two factions naturally did not meet to reminisce about the past. Although they were progenitors, the children of the heavens and earth, and basically did not have much contact due to their different ideals. Since they were able to sit together now, they were clearly discussing some matters. This matter was similar to what Lin Yun had guessed. It was related to the Great Thousand World. Due to the Dark Age, the progenitors of the Dark Age had given up on the outside to interfere with the Great Thousand Worlds and began to cultivate Shao Chins to compete with them. We have not met for several tens of thousands years, the primogenitor of the Dark Era said in a hoarse voice as soon as he appeared. They were all in the origin world, but they hadn't met for tens of thousands of years. In response, the progenitors of the Righteous Path Alliance replied faintly, "We have not met for several tens of thousands of years, but what can we do?" The progenitor of the Dark Age did not seem to be angry at the progenitors of the Righteous Path Alliance. It was as though he did not care at all. His face cannot be seen clearly. Under the concealment of the black mist, no one knew what expression the progenitor of the Dark Age had. However, it was only a short silence before the progenitor of the Dark Age spoke. "There has to be an end to the Great Thousand Worlds, right? There has to be an end, but the Dark Age seems to have failed. It can't be considered a failure. However, it's not the time yet. I believe the Righteous Path Alliance does not want to start a war at this time. Since that's the case, why don't we both take a step back and let the Great Thousand Worlds deal with the Great Thousand Worlds themselves? The Great Thousand Worlds would not interfere, and the Great Thousand Worlds would deal with the Great Thousand Worlds themselves. In the end, whoever could become the world lord of the Great Thousand Worlds would have to rely on their own abilities." Upon hearing the progenitor of the Dark Age's words, the progenitors of the Righteous Path Alliance fell silent. Although they had expected this, it was still difficult for them to accept it. Seeing that the progenitors of the Righteous Path Alliance were silent, the progenitor of the Dark Age sneered. "Is there still a need to hesitate? This is the best choice." Indeed, there was no need to hesitate. After all, the Righteous Path Alliance did not have a better choice in the current situation. It was even more impossible for them to start a war with the Dark Age. When the primogenitor of the Dark Era finished speaking, the primogenitors of the Alliance of the Orthodox sects did not hesitate any longer. They nodded and replied, "Let's do it this way. We'll rely on our own abilities, but only the people of the Great Thousand World can settle it." Of course, the progenitor of the Dark Age nodded in agreement. The internal matters of the Great Thousand Worlds would be settled by the Great Thousand Worlds themselves. This was the result of both sides coming to a compromise. After all, if the other universes continued to interfere, that was not the result that the progenitors wanted to see. Moreover, if this continued, more universes would be involved. Now, there were only the Cloud Palace, Immortal Palace, Demon Abyss, and Evil Sect. If this continued, it would be difficult to control how many universes would be involved. After reaching a consensus, the progenitor of the Dark Age left. Although the expressions of the progenitors of the Righteous Path Alliance could not be seen clearly, it was likely that they did not look too good. However, this was only a matter of one universe. It was not enough for them to pay too much attention to it. Although the Great Thousand Worlds had great potential, at the level of the progenitors, the ownership of one universe could no longer affect the overall situation. However, both sides were in a state of competition. No one wanted to hand over a universe like the Great Thousand Worlds, which had complete laws of heaven and earth, to someone else. After a long while, one of the progenitors said, "Inform Lin Yun to make preparations to sue Shao Chun. Since the Great Thousand Worlds would be settled by themselves, the Righteous Path Alliance naturally chose Xiao Chun without hesitation. After all, Xiao Chun was from the human race. Moreover, he was currently the most promising person to become the world master of the Great Thousand Worlds. Therefore, the Righteous Path Alliance could only choose Xiao Chun. As for who the Dark Age Alliance would choose in the end, that was not something that they should consider. In any case, whether Xiao Chun could succeed or not was directly related to the ownership of the Great Thousand Worlds. If Xiao Chun could successfully become the world master of the Great Thousand Worlds, then the Great Thousand Worlds would belong to the Righteous Path Alliance. If not, they would probably have to join the Dark Age Alliance. After hearing the progenitor's words, the others did not have any objections. Since both sides had reached a compromise and there was a result, this was the only way. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 26:10. The few primogenitors of the Alliance of the Orthodox sects naturally chose Xiao Chun. This was because at the moment, Xiao Chun was the best choice, and also the one who had the highest chance of becoming the world lord of the Greater Thousand World. The news quickly reached Lin Yun. After receiving the news from the Origin World, Lin Yun, who was talking to Xiao Chun, had a slight change in expression. Then, she smiled bitterly. Seeing this, Xiao Chun asked curiously, "What's wrong?" "Just as I guessed. Those old fellows have reached a consensus," Lin Yun said with a smile. Lin Yun had guessed that the matter of the Great Thousand World would have to be resolved internally. Although she did not know the reason, Lin Yun could see that the old fellows of the Alliance of the Righteous Sects did not want to start a full-scale war with the Dark Age at this time. They were even more unwilling to involve too many things because of the Great Thousand World. Of course, the Dark Age probably had the same idea. Therefore, both sides had no choice but to compromise with each other. The old fellows of the Alliance of the Righteous Sects had already sent a message to Lin Yun. They told her that the matter of the Great Thousand World would be resolved internally. As for who would become the world master of the Great Thousand World in the end, it would all depend on their own abilities. Lin Yun, including Mu Lingxian, and the others could no longer interfere with the matters of the Great Thousand World. At the same time, the Demon Abyss and the evil sects would no longer interfere. Moreover, the primogenitors asked Lin Yun to tell Xiao Chun that he could go all out and not worry about the problems of the other universes. The primogenitors of the Alliance of the Righteous Sects could guarantee this. After telling Xiao Chun the primogenitor's message, Lin Yun smiled bitterly and said, "I'm afraid this is the final result." "Yes." Xiao Chun nodded and replied. It was a good thing that the other universes no longer interfered with the matters of the Great Thousand World, but at the same time, all the pressure returned to Xiao Chun. Even if Lin Yun and Mu Lingxian wanted to help now, it would be impossible. However, this was actually good news for Xiao Chun. After all, Xiao Chun could be said to have the upper hand now. As of now, it seemed that no one in the Great Thousand World could compete with Xiao Chun. Moreover, Xiao Chun had obtained the initial recognition of the origin of the Great Thousand World and had absorbed and refined some of it. This was an advantage that no one could compare. This meant that the origin energy of the Great Thousand World This meant that the origin energy of the world was more inclined to choose Xiao Chun. There was pressure, but there were also advantages. The problem now was who would be chosen by the Dark Age to compete with Xiao Chun for the position of the World Lord. However, no matter who it was, there was at least a prerequisite, which was that they had to be from the Great Thousand World. Otherwise, they would break the rules and would not be recognized by the origin energy of the Great Thousand World. Looking at the entire Great Thousand World, whether it was the experts of the older generation or the younger generation, there seemed to be no one who could be compared with Xiao Chun. Even so, Lin Yun still reminded Xiao Chun not to let his guard down because the means of those old guys from the Dark Age were not comparable to ordinary people. Since they had reached such a consensus with the Alliance of the Righteous Sects, there was no doubt that they were fully prepared. Lin Yun's guess was correct. At this time, in a black palace in the Dark Age, the primogenitor who had gone to the Alliance of the Righteous Sects had returned and was speaking to another person. "It's done." The other primogenitor was also a primogenitor. Hearing this, The other primogenitors, who were also shrouded in black mist, nodded slightly. That's inevitable. We're already prepared. As they spoke, the two primogenitors looked at the blood pool in front of them. The blood pool was in the center of the hall, and bubbles were constantly coming out of the blood pool as if it was boiling water. The liquid in the blood pool was very dense. It did not look like blood, and there was not the slightest smell of blood. On the contrary, it exuded a faint fragrance that made people feel relaxed and happy. Under the gazes of the two primogenitors, not long after, a voice slowly walked out of the blood pool. If Xiao Chun was here, he would be able to recognize that this figure was none other than the former palace master of the evil god palace, Xie Tian. Xie Tian, who should have died under the heavenly punishment, had actually come back to life. Looking at everything, it should be the means of the Dark Age primogenitors. Slowly walking out of the blood pool, Xie Tian's eyes became colder than before. At the same time, he respectfully bowed to the two primogenitors in front of him. Many thanks, primogenitors. Back in the Great Thousand World, Xie Tian had been destroyed by the heavenly punishment, but no one had noticed that at the last moment, the Dark Age primogenitor had made a move and successfully protected a trace of Xie Tian's remnant soul. Even Lin Yuan and the others did not notice the primogenitor making a move, so Xie Tian had been able to come back to life. Not only had he escaped death, Xie Tian had also obtained many benefits in the Dark Age. The drawbacks of forcefully breaking through to the Ancestor Realm had been completely removed with the help of the Dark Age primogenitor. Moreover, his battle strength had been greatly increased. Not only that, even his innate talent had undergone a transformation. It could be said that after being reborn, Xie Tian was a completely different person from before. The current Xie Tian not only had peak innate talent, his battle strength was no different from a true Ancestor Realm expert. With the methods of the Dark Age primogenitor, it was not strange for them to be able to do this. The reason why the Dark Age primogenitor had revived Xie Tian was self-evident. It was to fight for the position of the World Master of the Great Thousand World. The Righteous Path Alliance had Xiao Chun who had the advantage, so the Dark Age primogenitor could only choose another path and choose Xie Tian. Moreover, they had specially made a move to increase Xie Tian's strength in all aspects. Because only like this could Xie Tian compete with Xiao Chun, otherwise there was no way to compete. Seeing Xie Tian respectfully bow in front of them, one of the primogenitors said in a soft voice, "Your son, the evil spirits, is already dead. In the great demon world, he died at the hands of Xiao Chun." Hearing this, Xie Tian's eyes filled with strong killing intent and grief. The evil spirits had died. This was something Xie Tian had never expected, and it was at the hands of Xiao Chun. Feeling Xie Tian's killing intent and grief, the Dark Age primogenitor paused for a bit before continuing. "Do you hate Xiao Chun? Everything you had was taken by him. The evil god palace was like this, and your son, the evil spirits, were also like this. Go to the Great Thousand World and take back everything that belongs to you. Take the position of World Master, and this old man will personally make a move to revive the evil spirits, allowing you and your son to reunite." Chapter 26:11. Perhaps no one would have thought that the ancestors of the Dark Era would choose Xie Tian. Xie Tian, who should have been dead, had been revived, and his strength could not be compared to before. In order to let Xie Tian have the strength to fight against Xiao Chun, the ancestors of the Dark Era had put in quite a bit of effort. They had even made a promise to help Xie Tian revive his son. However, Xie Tian did not know that it was impossible for the evil spirits to be revived because his physical body and divine soul had been destroyed by Xiao Chun. There was not a trace of him left, not even a trace of his soul. Even the ancestors of the Dark Era could not revive the evil spirits. Xie Tian revealed an excited look when he heard the ancestors' words. He immediately bowed respectfully and said, "Many thanks, ancestor." Xie Tian naturally did not know much about the origin world. When he was in the Great Thousand World, he was only left with a trace of his soul. He had been brought here by the ancestors of the Dark Era and had been the blood pool. He did not know much about the outside world, and the ancestors of the Dark Era did not say much to him. The only thing they said was to let Xietian fight for the position of World Master of the Great Thousand World. Other than that, Xietian knew nothing. Seeing Xietian's excited appearance, the ancestor of the Dark Era waved his hand and said in a soft voice, "Go. Take the position of World Master of the Great Thousand World, and this old man will revive your son, the evil spirits." After saying this, the ancestor of the Dark Era waved his hand, and Xietian instantly disappeared from the main hall. He directly sent Xietian out of the origin world. With Xietian's current strength, he was not qualified to come into contact with the origin world. In the eyes of the ancestors of the Dark Era, Xietian was at most a chess piece to fight for the Great Thousand World with the Righteous Alliance. Xiao Chun did not know about Xietian's revival at all. After Lin Yun received the message from the ancestors of the Righteous Alliance, she told Xiao Chun to return to the Great Thousand World immediately. Since both sides had come to a compromise and reached an agreement, the Dark Era was likely to make a move. Xiao Chun would definitely be in the Great Thousand World at this time. Moreover, since things had developed to this point, whether it was Lin Yun or Mu Ling Xian, they could not interfere in the matters of the Great Thousand World because the ancestors would not allow it. Hearing Lin Yun's words, Xiao Chun did not say anything. Xiao Chun had no other choice but to return to the Great Thousand World. Xiao Chun, not knowing who he was about to face, Xiao Chun felt a little helpless. He sent a message to Junwia, Dao Zhu, Xiao Xiao, and the others, asking them to return to the Cloud Palace as soon as possible and then to the Great Thousand World. The people who were still training in the Great Thousand World quickly replied after receiving Xiao Chen's message. They said that they would return to the Cloud Palace as soon as possible. In the next 2 days, Xiao Chun stayed in the Cloud Palace. Xiao Yao and Xiao Lao also returned to the Cloud Palace at Xiao Chen's request. After that, Junwia, Dao Zhu, and Xiao Xiao arrived one after another. After everyone arrived, Xiao Chun did not waste any time. After bidding farewell to Lin Yun and the others from the Cloud Palace, Xiao Chun and the others drove the spatial spirit boat and left the Great Thousand World. Lin Yun looked calm as she watched Xiao Chun and the others leave. No one could tell what she was thinking at all. Lin Yun was not confident about the final result of the Great Thousand World. Although Xiao Chun had broken through to the Ancestor Realm during this period of time, and his combat strength could be said to be the strongest among his peers, Lin Yun, who was well aware of the abilities of the primogenitors in the Origin World, knew that since the Dark Age dared to make such a request, they must be fully prepared. Therefore, it would not be easy for Xiao Chun to return to the Great Thousand World this time. The only good news was that Xiao Chun was now an Ancestor Realm expert. If Xiao Chun still could not break through to the Ancestor Realm, then there was probably no hope because there was no way to compete with the primogenitors of the Dark Age without reaching the Ancestor Realm. Along the way, Xiao Chun left the Great World and rushed toward the upper-class world. Along the way, he did not waste any time and was almost always in a hurry. Half a month passed in a flash, and Xiao Chun and the others finally returned to the Great Thousand World through the spatial black hole in the Primordial World. In the Primordial World, Xiao Chun even met Mu Ling Xian. Mu Ling Xian and Lin Yun both warned Xiao Chun that he had to be careful. The Immortal Palace could not interfere in the matters of the Great Thousand World. Obviously, Mu Ling Xian had also been ordered by the Old Fellows in the Origin World not to interfere in the matters of the Great Thousand World without permission. Xiao Chun was naturally not too shocked by this. After all, he already knew that this would happen. After returning to the Great Thousand World, there was no turmoil in the Great Thousand World at this time. Everything was the same as when he left. During this period of time, under the efforts of Tsang Xing and the others, the Cloud Palace's control over the Great Thousand World was becoming stronger and stronger. This made Xiao Chun secretly let out a sigh of relief. It was naturally best that nothing happened, but might not be so peaceful in the future. He rushed all the way to the Sword Sect. What Xiao Chun did not know was that when he arrived in the Great Thousand World, Xietian, who had arrived first, was in a small city in the Great Thousand World. This Xiao Chun was very ordinary in the Great Thousand World. At this time, in a house in the small city, Xie Tian and several other cultivators of the Great Thousand World were gathered together. These cultivators were the sect masters of various sects, or the patriarchs of various families in the Great Thousand World. Although they could not compare to the Sword Sect, they were all gathered together by Xie Tian at this time. Since he was almost killed by the heavenly tribulation last time, the evil god palace had already been uprooted by the Sword Sect. As for the evil cultivators, they had reached a point where everyone wanted to beat them. As long as they found the whereabouts of any evil cultivator, there was no doubt that they would be chased by the Sword Sect endlessly. So, after returning to the Great Thousand World this time, Xie Tian was not in a rush to make a move. Instead, he secretly pulled in quite a few people. Under Xie Tian's coercion, the sect masters and family heads present all joined Xie Tian's camp for various reasons. Xie Tian, who had already died once, was very clear that if he wanted to deal with the Sword Sect, he couldn't be in a rush and he couldn't let his guard down. So, Xie Tian's actions this time could be considered very careful, not having any intention of making a move even now. Please add, please vote, please recommend. Chapter 26:12. Xie Tian had secretly roped in quite a few sects and families during this time. Of course, the methods he used weren't that good, but even like this, Xie Tian's harvest wasn't small. Xie Tian had secretly roped in quite a few sects and families during this time. Of course, the methods he used weren't that good, but even like this, Xie Tian's harvest wasn't small. Of course, Xie Tian didn't expect these sects and families to help him deal with the Sword Sect. At most, they would act as spies and provide him with information. It had to be known that the current Sword Sect couldn't be compared to before. In the boundless world, the Sword Sect was like the sun in the sky, and there wasn't a single power that dared to casually provoke the Sword Sect. The evil god palace and the Mu Tian mountain had established the Sword Sect as the overlord of the boundless world. This was also one of Xiao Qian's greatest advantages. Xie Tian was very clear on this point. It was impossible for these sects and families to deal with the Sword Sect. They wouldn't agree, and they didn't have the guts. So, Xie Tian only had one goal in secretly contacting them, which was to provide him with some information. Regarding this, these sects and families had agreed. Of course, Xie Tian had promised quite a few benefits and added in the threat of his ancestor realm cultivation, forcing these sects and families to agree. These sects and families, to Xie Tian, were his eyes and ears. The only thing they were responsible for was providing him with information. As for truly contending with the Sword Sect, Xie Tian didn't have any extravagant hopes of relying on them. After all, these people had already lost their courage due to the might of the Sword Sect. He asked everyone about what happened in the boundless world during this time. At the same time, from one of them, Xie Tian learned that Xiao Chun had already led people back to the boundless world. Regarding this, Xie Tian didn't change at all, looking as calm as an ancient well. Regarding Xiao Chun returning to the boundless world, Xie Tian didn't find it strange. This was a very normal matter. Xie Tian also had his own advantage, which was that the enemy was in the light while he was in the dark. Xie Tian knew that his opponents were the Sword Sect and Xiao Chun. As for Xiao Chun, he didn't know who his opponents were at all. He didn't even know that Xiao Chun was still alive. Like this, it was hard for Xiao Chun to make an effective response, and Xie Tian could make a plan based on the current situation. This was Xie Tian's advantage, and it could be said that it was his only advantage. He was very clear that if he fought head-on, he wasn't Xiao Chen's match at all, so Xie Tian wasn't in a rush to expose himself. Hiding in the dark made it easier for Xie Tian to act, and at the same time, Xiao Chun didn't know how to defend against him. Thinking about it, he didn't even know who the enemy was, so naturally he had no way of defending against him. After understanding the things he wanted to know, Xie Tian looked at everyone with a cold smile and said, "Many thanks to everyone. I think everyone should know how to deal with today's matters. You haven't seen me before, right?" Right. Hearing Xie Tian's words, everyone nodded in agreement. They naturally didn't dare reveal the fact that they were in the sword sect with Xie Tian. What a joke! Who was Xie Tian? He was the former palace master of the evil god palace. With how hard the sword sect was chasing evil martial artists, if others knew that they had secretly contacted Xie Tian, the sword sect would not let them off. So, when Xie Tian said this, everyone nodded in agreement without any hesitation. They wished that they weren't related to Xie Tian at all. Everyone was afraid of Xie Tian, but they were even more afraid of the sword sect. Seeing everyone's terrified appearance, Xie Tian nodded in satisfaction and said, "Not bad. Since it's like this, I won't send everyone off." No need. No need. Everyone nodded in agreement before quickly leaving the small courtyard. Seeing these people leave, Xie Tian revealed a taunting smile. But very quickly, Xie Tian also left the small courtyard and arrived in a desolate mountain range. This mountain range normally wouldn't have people coming here, but Xie Tian came to a valley. In this valley, there were actually blood ponds, and in each blood pond, there was a person sitting cross-legged inside. There weren't many people, only around 1,000 people, but these people were the real power Xie Tian used to deal with the sword sect. These people were rogue cultivators without any fame, with low cultivations and no background. They were currently sitting in the blood ponds, so this was naturally Xie Tian's doing. And these things were naturally given to Xie Tian by the ancestors of the Dark Era. To have Xie Tian deal with the sword sect and Shao Chun, the ancestors of the Dark Era naturally wouldn't be unprepared. They were very clear on the difference between Xie Tian and Shao Chun and the sword sect. So before Xie Tian left the origin world, the ancestors of the Dark Era had already given Xie Tian this method and given him all the resources he needed. At this time, these blood ponds were used to increase their strength. This was a method of the Dark Age. The purpose was to cultivate a group of useful people for Xie Tian. Only in this way could Xie Tian have the strength to fight against the Swords Gate and Shao Chun. Of course, the Dark Era didn't go against the agreement by doing this. After all, these people were cultivators of the Great Thousand World, and outsiders didn't make a move. Otherwise, the ancestors of the Dark Era wouldn't have spent so much effort and would have directly sent experts from other universes. So even if the ancestors of the Righteous Path Alliance knew about this, they couldn't do anything. Of course, the ancestors of the Righteous Path Alliance could also use this method to train a group of people for Shao Chun. But based on the current situation, there was no need for this at all because the sword sect strength was definitely above Xie Tian's. Doing this was like drawing legs on a snake, so naturally there was no need. These people had already cultivated for several days. They looked like they were sleeping, but their cultivations were still increasing. Feeling the increase in their cultivations, Xie Tian couldn't help revealing a smile. According to what the ancestors of the Dark Era said, using this method, the strongest they could reach was the Emperor realm. Of course, this also depended on their foundation, but there was no problem in reaching the end realm. Moreover, using this method of the Dark Era to increase their cultivation, it wouldn't affect their battle strength. It could be said that after increasing their cultivation, their battle strength wouldn't be any different from cultivators of the same realm. This was what made Xie Tian the happiest. As for the side effects of using this method, Xie Tian didn't care at all because these people were just tools to him. After defeating Shao Chun and destroying the sword sect, Xie Tian wouldn't care about their lives. This chapter ends. Chapter 26:13. Xie Tian used Dark Age's method to create a group of useful people. Now he just needed to wait for their cultivations to increase. Although there weren't many people, only 1,000 or so, if all of them could break through to the End Realm, or even the Emperor Realm, there would be a force that couldn't be underestimated. This was the only help Dark Age gave Xie Tian, and also Xie Tian's confidence. He didn't plan on making a move for now. Xie Tian didn't even plan on leaving the valley. Knowing that Shao Chen's group had returned to the Boundless World, there was no need to think about it. The Sword Sect would definitely conduct a large-scale search to find the person who could compete with Shao Chun for the title of World Master. It was a pity that this search would be very difficult for the Sword Sect and Shao Chun because they didn't even have a target. Like this, it was hard to be nervous, but Xiao Chun would definitely do this. So, Xietian only needed to hide his whereabouts for a period of time and not let Xiao Chun find him. This was Xietian's plan. He would hide in the dark and wait for the right time to suddenly deal a fatal blow to Xiao Chun. Like this, Xietian's chances would be much higher. Just as Xietian thought, after returning to the sword sect, Xiao Chun didn't even have time to visit his parents and directly went to the sword sect's main hall. Although he had left for a long time, the sword sect was still thriving under the management of Song Xing, Zhou Song, Nangong Wan, and the others. Xiao Chun was very satisfied with this. However, now wasn't the time to be arrogant. Xiao Chun had been thinking about the Righteous Path Alliance and Dark Age. Since both sides had reached a compromise, it was very likely that Dark Age had already chosen someone to compete with him for the title of World Master. The most important thing now was to confirm this person's identity. Xiao Chun didn't know who Dark Age had chosen. Not to mention Xiao Chun, even the ancestors of the Righteous Path Alliance didn't know who Dark Age had chosen. As such, finding this person became the most crucial step at the moment. The most suspicious targets were naturally the former sect leaders of the Ling Tian sect. For example, Dao Xiong, Li Xiao, and the others. After all, these people were all Emperor Realm masters and could be considered the strongest masters in the sword sect. If Dark Age had to choose one person, it would have to choose from them. After all, it was impossible for the Dark Age to randomly choose an ordinary person to compete with him for the position of World Lord. This was too childish. His suspicions were directly locked on a Dao Xiong and the others. However, he couldn't be sure now. He had to investigate before he could be sure. Therefore, sitting on the main seat, Xiao Chun looked at Long Qing, Xinyuan Ling, Song Xing, and the others and said calmly, "Nothing special happened recently, right?" Hearing this, Song Xing and the others shook their heads, indicating that nothing special had happened. Seeing this, Xiao Chun was silent for a moment before he continued. Song Xing, send someone to secretly investigate Dao Xiong, Li Xiao, Dan Xingyang, Luo Xing, and the others. See if they have done anything strange recently, or if their cultivations have improved significantly. Xiao Chun thought about the origin world for a long time and didn't tell Song Xing and the others. It wasn't that Xiao Chun didn't trust them, but even he didn't know much about the origin world. It wouldn't be of much use to tell them. Now, Xiao Chun only told Jun Wuya, Long Qing, Xinyuan Ling, and Qin Shuru about the origin world. Everyone was confused. He didn't tell them about the origin world for the time being. When they heard that Xiao Chun wanted to investigate Dao Xiong, Li Xiao, and the others, and even Luo Xing, Song Xing, and the others were confused, but they still nodded respectfully. Since Xiao Chun had spoken, he naturally had his reasons. Seeing everyone nod, Xiao Chun added worriedly, "Just investigate in secret. Don't let anyone know." This matter could only be done in secret. After all, if Dao Xiong and the others knew about it, they would overthink. Xiao Chun didn't want to jump to conclusions too early. He temporarily placed his suspicions on Dao Xiong, Li Xiao, and the others. After instructing them, Xiao Chun asked Song Xing and the others to leave, leaving only Long Qing and Xinyuan Ling looking at the two of them. Xiao Chun sighed helplessly. "Big brother, second sister, who do you think the Dark Age will choose to compete for the position of World Master?" Without a clear target, Xiao Chun was really uncomfortable. Hearing this, Long Qing didn't answer. Instead, it was Xinyuan Ling who spoke in a deep voice after a moment of silence. "There are many creatures in the Great Thousand World. It is indeed like looking for a needle in a haystack. However, just as you thought, third brother, even if the Dark Age wants to choose a person, they won't choose an ordinary person. So, third brother's idea should be correct. However, it's not entirely correct to focus on Dao Xiong and the others. Don't forget that there are many old monsters in the Great Thousand World who have hidden themselves. They might also be the targets of the Dark Age. In Xiao Chen's opinion, even if the Dark Age wanted to choose a person to compete with him, they would definitely choose from many masters, and their cultivation would have to be at least at the Emperor Realm. Therefore, the possibility of it being Dao Xiong and the others was very high. However, After being reminded by Xinyuan Ling, Xiao Chen quickly came back to his senses. Yes, it was indeed too one-sided to focus on Dao Xiong, Li Xiao, and the others. After all, they weren't the only Emperor Realm Masters in the Great Thousand World. During the war between the good and evil paths, many old monsters who had hidden themselves had also appeared. Compared to Dao Xiong, Li Xiao, and the others, the cultivation of these old monsters wasn't weak at all, and the Dark Age was more likely to choose them. It could be said that he was enlightened by Xinyuan Ling's words. Xiao Chan was silent for a long time, then looked at Xinyuan Ling and said, "Big brother, if you are in charge, can you find out the whereabouts of these people and secretly investigate? With the current strength of the Sword Sect, this naturally won't be a problem." Hearing this, Xinyuan Ling replied with a chuckle, very confident. "Good. Then I'll have to trouble Big Brother with this matter. See if these people's cultivation suddenly improved a lot. If the Dark Age contacted them, they would definitely find a way to improve their cultivation. Otherwise, with just their Emperor Realm cultivation, they aren't qualified to compete with me," Xiao Chen said. To determine whether these people were in contact with the Dark Age, Xiao Chen's idea was to see their cultivation. After all, if the Dark Age really chose someone to compete with him for the position of World Master, they would definitely improve their cultivation. After all, it was indeed impossible for an Emperor Realm Master to compete with Xiao Chen. So, as long as there was a substantial or strange increase in their cultivation, they could determine whether they were related to the Dark Age. Seeking collection, monthly votes, recommendation. End of this chapter. Chapter 2614. Xiao Chen's first target was the sovereigns of the Great Thousand World. After all, they were the ones who were most likely to threaten him. Xiao Chen's first target was the sovereigns of the Great Thousand World. After all, they were the ones who were most likely to threaten him. Xiao Chen handed the matter over to Xinyuan Ling to handle, but his attitude was still the same. Before there was any evidence, it was best to investigate in secret. There was no need to make a big fuss. Xinyuan Ling also supported this. "Third brother, don't worry. I will personally take care of this matter." Xinyuan Ling nodded to Xiao Chen and replied seriously. Xiao Chen was naturally at ease with Xinyuan Ling. After all, the two of them had a good relationship. After discussing the matter, Xiao Chen first returned home to see Xiao Qing and Bai Ruyue. After leaving the Great Thousand World for so many years, now that he had returned, he had to see his parents. However, Xiao Chen did not stay for long. After chatting with the two elders for a while, Xiao Chen directly left. The reason why he did not personally investigate Dao Xiong, Li Xiao, and the other sovereigns was that Xiao Chen had more important things to do, and that was to see Tenzu. As Tenzu of the Great Thousand World, Xiao Chen had something to discuss with him. Of course, he also had some questions to ask. Xiao Chen was naturally no stranger to Tenzu's residence. After leaving the Sword Sect alone, Xiao Chen rushed all the way to the place where the Tian clan lived. Along the way, Xiao Chen did not encounter the slightest obstruction. Soon, he arrived in front of the wooden house where the Tian clan lived. When Xiao Chen appeared, the Tian clan also walked out of the house. When he saw Xiao Chen, Tenzu did not look too surprised. Instead, he smiled gently and said, "I already guessed that you would come. Yes, there are some things that I would like to ask you about." Hearing this, Xiao Chen nodded and replied. With Xiao Chen's current cultivation, he could already stand on equal footing with Tenzu. If the two of them fought, Tenzu would not even be a match for Xiao Chen. However, Tenzu had a special status, so Xiao Chen still treated him with respect. Tenzu smiled and gestured for Xiao Chen to take a seat. Then, he personally brewed tea and said, "How was it? Did the trip to the Great World go smoothly?" "Not bad. I have finally successfully broken through to the ancestor stage," Xiao Chen replied with a smile. After speaking, Xiao Chen paused for a moment before asking in a probing manner, "Do you know the origin world?" Xiao Chen wasn't sure if Tenzu knew about the origin world or not. After all, Tenzu's identity was different. Perhaps he knew about the origin world in advance. Tenzu was slightly taken aback when he heard Xiao Chen's words. He looked at Xiao Chen in surprise and asked, "Where did you hear this from?" Tenzu's change made Xiao Chen certain that he obviously knew about the origin world. Xiao Chen did not conceal this and replied truthfully, "I heard it from Palace Master Lin Yin." No wonder. So, it was Lin Yin who told Xiao Chen. This was not surprising. Tenzu's eyes flashed with surprise. He stopped what he was doing and took the initiative to speak before Xiao Chen could ask. "Actually, I know very little about the origin world. Perhaps it's because I'm Tenzu, so I know some secrets that others don't know." Tenzu slowly told Xiao Chen everything he knew about the origin world. Xiao Chen was a little disappointed after listening to the Sky Clan's description because Tenzu's understanding of the origin world was even less than Lin Yun's. Tenzu had never been to the origin world. The only thing he knew about the origin world was that it was the birthplace of heaven and earth. Other than that, Tenzu knew nothing about the origin world and its situation. Tenzu was a little disappointed that he couldn't answer Xiao Chen's first question. However, there was nothing he could do. After all, if he didn't know, he didn't know. There was no point in asking further. It seemed that he could only rely on himself to truly understand the origin world. However, according to Lin Yun, he would have to wait until he became the world lord of the Great Thousand World if he wanted to truly understand the origin world. After all, based on the current situation, the primogenitors of the origin world definitely wouldn't take the initiative to contact Xiao Chen. They would only contact Xiao Chen after the dust had settled in the Great Thousand World. Since it was impossible to get an answer for the time being, Xiao Chen did not continue to dwell on it. Instead, he told the Sky Ancestor everything he knew about the origin world, including the alliance of the Orthodox sects, the Dark Age, and the current situation of the vast thousand worlds. Tenzu was obviously shocked when he heard Xiao Chen's words. He sat there in a daze for a long time without saying a word. He didn't know about the primogenitors of the origin world, nor did he know that the current situation of the Great Thousand World was already like this. The battle between the alliance of righteous sects and the Dark Age made Xiao Chen face an unknown opponent. Both sides were competing for the position of World Lord. After remaining silent for a long time, Tenzu finally looked at Xiao Chen with a complicated expression and asked, "What do you want me to do?" Tenzu naturally didn't think that Xiao Chen was looking for someone to confide in since Xiao Chen had told him everything. There must be a purpose for Xiao Chen to say so much. Tenzu didn't beat around the bush and asked directly. Personally, Tenzu was definitely on Xiao Chen's side. In this regard, Xiao Chen also said bluntly, "Can I directly absorb the origin energy now?" This was the question Xiao Chen was most concerned about. After all, in order to become the World Lord, one had to obtain the recognition of the origin energy of the Great Thousand World. If Xiao Chen could obtain the recognition and absorb the origin energy of the Great Thousand World in one fell swoop, he could directly become the World Lord of the Great Thousand World. At that time, no matter how strong the person the Dark Age found was, it would be useless because the origin energy would be absorbed by Xiao Chen by then. The World Lord of the Great Thousand World would also be determined. Naturally, there would be no competition. Xiao Chen wanted to use the simplest and most direct method to solve the problem. However, the heavenly ancestor shook his head helplessly when he heard Xiao Chen's words. "I can't do anything about this. I've said before that although I'm the Tenzu of the Great Thousand World, I'm not qualified to intervene in the matter of the origin energy. The origin energy is an extremely strange force. Although it doesn't have complete spiritual intelligence like me, it also has its own thoughts. No one can interfere with who it chooses and recognizes, including me. Therefore, Xiao Chen, if you want to obtain the origin energy, you can only rely on yourself. If the origin energy doesn't recognize you, remember not to use force. Otherwise, even if you're an ancestor now, you definitely won't be able to withstand the violence of the origin energy. Again, no one could interfere in the matter of the origin energy." After hearing Tenzu's answer, although Xiao Chen had expected such an outcome, he couldn't help but feel a little disappointed after hearing the answer. Please add it to your collection. Monthly vote. Recommended. End of this chapter. Chapter 2615. Tenzu could not interfere with the matter of the origin source energy. Moreover, according to Tenzu, although he was Tenzu, he did not have the ability to interfere with the World Master. Now that the alliance of the righteous path in the origin world and the Dark Age had reached a compromise, the Sky Clan could not decide who the World Master of the Great Thousand World would be. In fact, even if the World Master was not Shao Chun, Tenzu could not do anything and could only choose to submit. Tenzu could only submit to whoever was the World Master. This was something that could not be changed. After chatting with Tenzu for a long time, Shao Chun said with a solemn expression, "I want to go to the ancestral land again." Shao Chun took the initiative to mention that he wanted to go to the ancestral land again. Tenzu did not refuse and readily agreed. Tenzu naturally hoped that Shao Chun could become the world master of the Great Thousand World. However, this was not something that Tenzu could decide. However, the Sky Clan was willing to provide some help to Shao Chun as long as it was within their power. As for whether Shao Chun could succeed in the end, it would depend on his own ability. After receiving the Sky Clan's agreement, the two of them left together and headed straight for the ancestral land. Shao Chun was naturally familiar with the ancestral land. After all, Shao Chun had been to the ancestral land before. However, Shao Chun and Tenzu's expressions sank when they arrived at the ancestral land again. This was because the ancestral land in front of them was shrouded in a layer of platinum light. After trying, Shao Chun realized that he could not enter the ancestral land at all. The last time he came, Shao Chun could enter the ancestral land without any obstruction. However, this time, he could not enter the ancestral land at all. Seeing this scene, Shao Chun frowned slightly, while the heavenly ancestor beside him said helplessly, "This is probably what the power of the origin means. Before the true Lord of the world is determined, the power of the origin should not have any contact with the outside world." Originally, the origin source energy had already recognized Shao Chun. Otherwise, it would not have allowed Shao Chun to absorb that small ball of origin source energy. However, the origin source energy had sealed the ancestral land. The meaning behind this was obvious. There was indeed someone in the Great Thousand World who was qualified to compete with Shao Chun for the position of World Master. The origin source energy was waiting for the final result. Whoever won the competition would be recognized by the origin source energy and become the World Master of the Great Thousand World. Faced with such an outcome, Shao Chun was a little helpless. Shao Chun could not break through the power that sealed the ancestral land. Even though he was an ancestor, he could not break through this power at all. In this way, if Shao Chun wanted to become the World Master of the Great Thousand World, there was only one way left, and that was to win the next competition. Only by defeating the competitor chosen by the Dark Age would Shao Chun be able to enter the ancestral land again and become the World Master of the Great Thousand World. "Let's go," Shao Chun said to Tenzu after glancing helplessly in the direction of the ancestral land. Since he could not enter the ancestral land, there was no point in continuing to stay here. The most important thing now was to find the competitor chosen by the Dark Age as soon as possible. It was difficult for Shao Chun to make an accurate response since he did not even know who the enemy was. Moreover, based on the current situation, the competitor was probably in the Great Thousand World, but Shao Chun did not know who it was. After hearing Shao Chun's words, Tenzu did not say much and left the ancestral land with Shao Chun. Fresh after returning to Tenzu's residence, Shao Chun's mood was obviously a little low. Seeing this, Tenzu also comforted him. "Actually, you don't have to be like this. Based on the current situation, you're still the most suitable person to become the World Master of the Great Thousand World, and that so-called competitor doesn't have an advantage in many aspects." Tenzu's words were true. Shao Chun did have the advantage at the moment. As long as he fought steadily, there should not be any problems. As for that competitor, the only thing that gave Shao Chun a headache was his identity. As long as he could confirm his identity, Shao Chun might be able to kill him while he was still in the cradle to prevent future trouble. Unfortunately, Shao Chun still did not know who that person was, and it was impossible for him to kill all the people he suspected. Once he did so, it was bound to arouse public anger. Moreover, who could be sure that the competitor was among the people he suspected? Tenzo wanted to comfort Xiao Chun, but Xiao Chun also nodded slightly. I know. Since things have come to this point, there's no other way. We can only try our best to find that person. Since things had come to this, and even the origin energy had to wait for the final result, Xiao Chun could only do his best to compete for the position of the World Master. As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Chun smiled at Tenzu. Okay, I should go back. Okay. Hearing this, the Ancestor of Heaven nodded slightly and did not say much. The Ancestor of Heaven was powerless to do anything about the Great Thousand World. After all, it was related to the World Lord, and the Ancestor of Heaven did not have the ability to intervene. After bidding farewell to Tenzu, Xiao Chun returned to the Great Thousand World. At the same time, in the sword sect of the Great Thousand World, Xin Yuanling was personally responsible for finding that competitor. Under Xin Yuanling's orders, the entire sword sect seemed to be operating at full speed. During this period, as the sword sect control over the Great Thousand World grew stronger, various channels of information were constantly being perfected. The sword sect now had its own spies in the entire Great Thousand World, and they were able to find out a lot of secret matters. This was also a great help to Xin Yuanling. This was the first time that Xin Yuanling was only in charge of the sword sect. Although Xin Yuanling had always been with Xiao Chun, most of the time, Xin Yuanling almost did not care about the sword sect's matters. Many people in the sword sect knew that Xin Yuanling was very talented, and his cultivation had reached the Emperor Realm grand perfection. However, they still did not know much about Xin Yuanling's other abilities. This time, as Xin Yuanling personally went into battle, many people saw another side of Xin Yuanling for the first time. Xiao Chun should still remember what Li Tian said to him when he was in the Great Demon World. At that time, Xiao Chun envied Cloud Palace for having a think tank like Li Tian. However, Li Tian told Xiao Chun that the sword sect also had people like him, but Xiao Chun had not discovered it yet. At that time, Xiao Chun had been wondering if there was really someone comparable to Li Tian around him. This time, the strategy that Xin Yuanling displayed shocked many people in the sword sect. Chapter 26:16. Xiao Chun naturally longed for someone like Li Tian. If a force had someone like Li Tian in charge, it would indeed be a lot more reassuring. Xiao Chun naturally longed for someone like Li Tian. If a force had someone like Li Tian in charge, it would indeed be a lot more reassuring. On the way back to the Great Thousand World, Xiao Chun did not directly rush to the sword sect. Instead, he went straight to the saber sect. Without any clues, Xiao Chun planned to wander around the Great Thousand World by himself. Of course, after seeing Dao Xiong and the others with his own eyes, he could confirm his guess. Xiao Chun planned to test Dao Xiong and the others personally. Although Dao Xiong and the others were currently his biggest threat, from a certain point of view, Dao Xiong and the others probably would not do such a thing. However, in the end, he still needed to see the final evidence. Since he had no idea where to start now, he might as well walk around. Perhaps there would be some surprises. Moreover, Xin Yuanling and Song Xing were in charge of the sword sect. Even if Xiao Chun went back, it would not make much sense. At the moment, Xiao Chun was anxious to find out who was hiding in the dark. Who was the person chosen by the Dark Age to compete with him for the position of World Master? Xiao Chun was very anxious now. The feeling of not even knowing who the opponent was indeed very unbearable. Therefore, Xiao Chun obviously could not sit still when he was in love. Even Xiao Chun personally took action. The sword sect was even more frantic, launching a frantic investigation of all the Emperor Realm Masters in the Great Thousand World. Xiao Chun had previously requested to investigate in secret as much as possible. After all, everything now was just suspicion. If they made a big fuss and caused panic, there would be no benefits. However, such a large-scale and intensive investigation would obviously attract the attention of others. As a matter of fact, after Xiao Chun arrived at the Saber Sect, he immediately saw Dao Xiong and Dao Ju. After returning from the Great Thousand World, Dao Ju's improvement was obvious. However, at this moment, when the three of them sat together, the atmosphere was a little strange. Dao Xiong and Dao Zhu both knew that the sword sect was investigating them, especially Dao Xiong. Recently, Dao Xiong could be said to have been under the sword sect surveillance. However, although Dao Xiong was not happy about this, he did not stop it. Since he had already chosen to submit to the sword sect, it was impossible for him to attack the sword sect spies. Of course, he was not happy. And Xiao Chen looked at Dao Xiong and said kindly, "Senior, there are some things that I can't tell you in detail right now. However, this is a matter of great importance, and I have no other choice. If I have offended you in any way, I hope you can forgive me." From Dao Xiong's reaction, there shouldn't be any problems. After all, Dao Xiong could be said to be calm when facing the sword sect spies. He didn't try to stop them at all and directly ignored them. He allowed the sword sect spies to monitor him. Moreover, after seeing Dao Xiong with his own eyes, Xiao Chen secretly sensed Dao Xiong's current cultivation. He had made some progress, but it wasn't by much. It was a very normal situation. He could basically rule out the possibility of Dao Xiong being related to the Dark Age. After all, if Dao Xiong was really the person chosen by the Dark Age, then, with the Dark Age's methods, they would definitely help Dao Xiong improve his cultivation. However, Dao Xiong's cultivation hadn't improved by much. Everything was normal. Because of this, Xiao Chen comforted him. Hearing this, Dao Xiong's expression became slightly better. Sect Master Xiao is too polite. Moreover, I don't have the right to refuse. After chatting with Dao Xiong for a while and basically ruling Dao Xiong out of suspicion, Xiao Chen didn't stay any longer and quickly left. At the same time, in the sword sect, Xianyuan Ling, Cang Xing, Nangong Guan, Zhou Song, and the others were also gathered in the main hall. During this period of crazy investigation, it could be said that they had covered almost the entire Great Thousand World. All the Emperor Realm Masters in the Great Thousand World were on the surveillance list, but after a period of monitoring, many Emperor Realm Masters didn't find anything. Everything was very normal. All the Emperor Realm Masters, whether it's their cultivation or their lifestyle, everything is normal. There's nothing suspicious about them. Cang Xing frowned slightly and said somewhat gloomily, everything was normal. Basically, it could be said that these people were ruled out of suspicion. This left everyone at a loss. Right now, they didn't know what to do. It was impossible to filter all the cultivators in the entire Great Thousand World. This was simply impossible. There was probably no clear number of cultivators in the entire Great Thousand World so far. Wanting to investigate all the cultivators in the entire Great Thousand World was simply a fantasy. No matter how strong the sword sect was, their energy was limited. The best they could do was to select a few suspicious people to investigate. This was already the limit. But so far, this method didn't seem to have worked because there was nothing strange about the people being investigated. After such a long period of strict monitoring, they still didn't find anything. When Cang Xing said this, everyone present didn't know how to answer. In any case, everyone was now in a helpless situation. Only Xianyuan Ling was looking at a letter in his hand at this time and frowning slightly, as if he was thinking about something. The letter in Xianyuan Ling's hand was a very inconspicuous piece of information. It recorded that recently, more than 1,000 cultivators had mysteriously disappeared. For the entire Great Thousand World, the disappearance of more than 1,000 cultivators wasn't a big deal. Furthermore, these cultivators weren't strong. They were basically unknown and ordinary cultivators who weren't outstanding at all. Hence, it was even more impossible for them to attract attention. However, it was this piece of information that didn't seem to have any value that attracted Xianyuan Ling's attention. Ignoring the complaints and helplessness of Cang Xing and the others, Xianyuan Ling stared at the letter and pondered for a long time. It was only after long while that Xianyuan Ling spoke. Has this information been confirmed? Suddenly hearing Xianyuan Ling's question, Cang Xing and the others looked over. Seeing the letter in Xianyuan Ling's hand, Zhou Song spoke. It has been confirmed. There is indeed such a thing, but what does this have to do with us? These cultivators are all unknown and have no value at all. The contents of the letter Song Xing, were naturally seen by Zhou Song and the others. However, no one cared about it. Now, because of Xiao Qin's matter, everyone was already very busy. How could they be in the mood to care about such a thing? Hearing Zhou Song's answer, Xian Yuanling fell silent again. Seeing this, Song Xing asked, "What's wrong? What's strange about this information?" Chapter 26:17. Xin Yuanling seemed to be very concerned about the disappearance of more than 1,000 cultivators. This puzzled Song Xing and the rest. After all, everyone's mission now was to find the person chosen by the Dark Age. This was the most important thing. If it were any other time, Song Xing and the rest would probably send people to investigate this matter. However, they did not have the energy or mood to do so now. However, in the face of everyone's doubts, Xin Yuanling did not explain too much. He just looked at the letter in his hand and fell in a deep thought. Xin Yuanling did not speak. Song Xing and the rest were even more confused. It was not until a long while later that Xin Yuanling raised his head. The expression in his eyes changed slightly. He said in a deep voice, "There's something wrong with the disappearance of these people." Hearing this, Song Xing and the rest were stunned again. What was the problem? They could not see the slightest problem with the disappearance of more than 1,000 people. This time, in the face of Song Xing and the rest's doubts, Xin Yuanling explained. On the surface, these more than 1,000 people do not seem to have any interaction or relationship. However, these people's ages are about the same. Their ages were very close. However, after hearing this, Song Xing was somewhat puzzled. But what can this prove? Their ages were about the same. This could just be a coincidence. It cannot prove anything at all. In this regard, Xin Yuanling also nodded and admitted. Indeed, if it's just based on this point, it can't prove anything. However, there's another point. These cultivators are all individual cultivators and have no background. Moreover, the time of their disappearance is too close. Moreover, they all disappeared for no reason. If we combine the above points, I'm afraid this is not as simple as a coincidence. A simple suspicious point could be a coincidence. However, with so many suspicious points pieced together, it could not be described as a simple coincidence. There must be something wrong here. After hearing Xin Yuanling's words, Song Xing and the rest fell silent. Thinking about it carefully, it seemed to be the case. However, so what if there were suspicious points? The most important thing now was to complete the task given by Xiao Qin. This was the most troublesome problem at the moment. Let's think about it. If the person chosen by the Dark Age wants to compete with the Sect Master for the position of World Master, then he must have a group of useful people under him. Now that all the major forces in the Great Thousand World are basically under the surveillance of the Sword Sect, the Sword Sect will be able to detect any strange movements of these forces immediately. In this way, what's the best method? It's definitely a good choice. Of these cultivators are generally weak. But what if there's a special method to increase their strength? In that case, all the problems can be explained. I believe the Dark Age doesn't lack such methods. The major forces were indeed under the strict surveillance of the Sword Sect. Song Xing and the others knew this. Xin Yuanling was right. In the face of such a situation, the best way was to choose useful people from the many cultivators. After hearing Xin Yuanling's words, the expressions of Song Xing and the others changed slightly. If that was the case, then there was indeed a big problem with this matter. Of course, the most important thing was that everyone's current investigation had reached a dead end. Dao Xiong, Li Xiao, Luo Xing, Dan Xinyang, and the other known Emperor masters did not find anything suspicious after this period of investigation. To put it bluntly, their suspicions could basically be eliminated directly. The emperors did not have any abnormalities. This could only mean that there was something wrong with the direction of their investigation. At this time, Xin Yuanling noticed this and was ready to start from a different angle. August 1st Chinese network at this time, the disappearance of more than 1,000 people naturally attracted Xin Yuanling's attention. Although Xie Tian was very secretive when he took these people away, there would always be a loophole. As long as they followed this line of investigation, they should be able to find something. Of course, Xin Yuanling could not be certain that these people were related to this matter. However, there was nothing wrong with investigating. After Xin Yuanling's explanation, Song Xing and the others no longer objected. Then, Xin Yuanling spoke. Everything else will be as usual. I'll investigate this matter personally. The investigation of the emperors could not be completed yet. Because of the importance of this matter, Xin Yuanling and the others did not dare to make a conclusion easily. However, the disappearance of more than 1,000 people was very strange. Xin Yuanling planned to investigate this matter personally. In this regard, Song Xing and the others nodded in agreement. For a time, the direction of the sword sect investigation also changed, starting from the disappearance of more than 1,000 people. Xie Tian probably did not know that he had attracted Xin Yuanling's attention so quickly. In fact, when he was doing this series of things, he was very secretive. He thought that he should have done it flawlessly, but it was still the same sentence. There would always be a loophole, not to mention that he met Xin Yuanling. From a seemingly simple matter, Xin Yuanling was not confused by the surface. Instead, he was keenly aware of the hidden problem. So he decided to investigate this matter thoroughly without hesitation. At this time, Xie Tian was still hiding in the valley, waiting for the cultivation of more than 1,000 people to finish. To compete with Xiao Chun, Xie Tian needed a group of people he could use. If he was alone, Xie Tian knew that he could not compete with Xiao Chun and the Sword Sect. From the beginning, he did not think of looking for the large powers of the Great Thousand World, because Xie Tian knew that once he contacted those powers, it would be very easy for the Sword Sect to find out. At that time, it was very likely that he would be exposed. For Xie Tian, there were no benefits at all. So, Xie Tian chose those rogue cultivators without any background. Moreover, he used the special methods of the Dark Era to increase their strength. Like this, he could ensure the loyalty of these people and also not attract the attention of the Sword Sect. It was a method that satisfied both sides. But Xie Tian never thought that his methods would still attract Xin Yuanling's attention. Moreover, Xin Yuanling had already begun investigating this matter. Xie Tian wanted to hide in the dark and wait for an opportunity to make a move, but how could Xin Yuanling give him this chance? Any existence that could threaten Xiao Chun, Xin Yuanling would destroy them without any hesitation. A faint smile hung on Xin Yuanling's face as he looked at the thousands of cultivators sitting cross-legged in the blood pool with their eyes closed. He had no idea that Xin Yuanling had already begun to investigate this matter. He even muttered with satisfaction, "Soon, in another half a month, they will come out of closed-door cultivation." Since he began increasing the cultivation of these people, it had already been a month. Feeling the aura coming from these people, Xie Tian nodded in satisfaction. In another half a month, these people would come out of closed-door cultivation. Chapter 26:18. Xie Tian still hadn't discovered the Sword Sect's movements, and this was his greatest disadvantage, which was that he didn't have his own information channels. Xie Tian still hadn't discovered the Sword Sect's movements, and this was his greatest disadvantage, which was that he didn't have his own information channels. After all, the evil god palace had already been exterminated, and the evil martial artists from before had all been killed by the Sword Sect and the other large powers. Even if there were fish that escaped the net, they wouldn't dare show themselves at this time. Moreover, Xie Tian couldn't deliberately look for these evil martial artists because if he did, Xie Tian would be exposed. Without his own information channels, Xie Tian had no way of knowing the movements of the Sword Sect, and he also didn't know that Xin Yuanling had already set his eyes on these missing martial artists. Under Xin Yuanling's orders, there were quite a few deacons from the Sword Sect that went to the cities or homes of these martial artists to investigate. Moreover, Xin Yuanling had overlooked a problem before, which was that the places where these missing martial artists lived were not that far from each other. It could be said that they lived in the same state, and the distance between them was at most a few cities. This discovery made Xianyuan Ling even more suspicious that there was a problem with the disappearance of these martial artists. They were so close to each other, and their disappearances were so concentrated. This was definitely not a coincidence. But what made Xianyuan Ling's head hurt was that as the investigation continued, the families and friends of these missing martial artists couldn't provide any useful clues at all. First, they didn't know why these people disappeared. Did they go somewhere on their own, or were taken away by someone else? Perhaps it was some other possibility, but these people didn't know anything. Second, when these people disappeared, no one saw anything. It was like they had disappeared into thin air. Not only did they ask the friends and family of these martial artists, the sword sect's deacons also asked the local city lord's palace. In this period of time, the city lord's palace didn't find anything strange, and they didn't see any strange people. It was clearly very suspicious, but there were no clues or evidence, so the investigation seemed to have reached a deadlock. But while the sword sect was investigating these missing martial artists, there were some people who were panicking. These people were the sect masters of the large sects and families that had contact with Xietian. They had seen Xietian, and although they didn't rely on Xietian, they had provided quite a bit of information to Xietian. If the Sword's Gate were to find out about this, the consequences would be dire. In addition, the experts of the Sword's Gate have been investigating in the nearby cities, which made these people even more anxious. They were afraid that they would be exposed because of this. These people were not Xietian's companions and did not have any relations with Xietian, but they had seen Xietian before. This was fine, but they had been hiding this matter the entire time, so their hearts were filled with panic. They didn't know if the sword deceased, but based on the current situation, the possibility of it being a coincidence was too low. Because if it was a coincidence, the sword sect's people wouldn't have been investigating the surrounding cities. This was clearly not logical. The only possibility was that the sword sect had some information and had a general goal. But what this goal or clue was, these people didn't know, and this was what they were most worried about. It was a bit like scaring themselves, but there was no other way. Their hearts were filled with guilt, so naturally they were worried about being exposed. The sword sect hadn't noticed the abnormalities of these families and sect for now. As for Xianyuan Ling, he had been paying attention to the progress of this matter, but after several days, he still hadn't found a single clue. This made Xianyuan Ling's mood even more depressed. Could it be that I was wrong? Not finding a single clue, Xianyuan Ling couldn't help doubting himself. But all the signs indicated that there was indeed a problem with this matter. It was very likely that there was a big secret hidden. So, Xianyuan Ling didn't give up and even continued to strengthen his efforts, vowing to get to the bottom of the disappearance of these warriors. In fact, there was nothing wrong with Xianyuan Ling's, or rather, Xianyuan Ling had long guessed the truth, but unfortunately, he didn't have any evidence. Just as Xianyuan Ling was secretly frustrated, an elder suddenly came to the door with a shocked expression on his face. At a glance, it was obvious that this elder must have found something. Xianyuan Ling immediately asked, "What's wrong? Did you find something?" This elder was now one of the people in charge of investigating these missing warriors. Since he came personally, there must be something to report. Xianyuan Ling couldn't help but be excited and look forward to it. Faced with Xianyuan Ling's inquiry, the elder's excitement didn't diminish at all. He said excitedly to Xianyuan Ling, "There is indeed a discovery, and it's a pleasant surprise." "Oh, tell me about it." When our people were investigating the missing warriors, they found a local big family. We originally planned to ask about these missing warriors, but who would have thought that we would find something else? And something else? According to this patriarch, Xietian came personally a month ago. Under Xietian's threat, they couldn't help but think that he had provided some information. Perhaps because he was afraid of being exposed, this patriarch took the initiative to admit everything. Xietian? Hearing these two words, Xianyuan Ling suddenly stood up, his eyes filled with shock. Who would have thought that it would actually be Xietian? In the battle to destroy the evil god palace, Xietian had already been killed by Tian Fa, but he actually didn't die. Xietian's appearance, made Xian Yuanling suddenly feel enlightened. If it really was Xie Tian, then everything made sense. From the beginning, when everyone found nothing to now, when Xie Tian was exposed, everything could be explained. It was no wonder that no one had been able to find anything from the start of their investigation. Those Emperor Realm Masters had no connection to Dark Age at all, and the person chosen by Dark Age was not these Emperor Realm Masters, but Xie Tian. In fact, it also made sense. Xie Tian was indeed the most suitable candidate. First of all, he was from the Great Thousand World. There was no doubt about this. Second, Xie Tian was Xiao Qin's opponent before. Compared to Dao Ju, Li Xiao, Luo Xing, and the others, Xie Tian was more suitable. A complicated look appeared in Xian Yuanling's eyes. He looked into the distance and whispered softly. So it was him. Did it make sense? How stupid. I didn't guess it earlier. It was definitely a pleasant surprise. Who would have thought that the patriarch of a big family would actually take the initiative to admit these things? Or perhaps he was too afraid, so he chose to take the initiative to confess. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation. Chapter 26:19. Xie Tian's appearance filled Xian Yuanling's heart with joy, but there was also a trace of vigilance. After all, a person who should have died a long time ago was actually not dead. Like this, it was most likely the work of those old fellows from the Dark Age. Xie Tian's appearance filled Xian Yuanling's heart with joy, but there was also a trace of vigilance. After all, a person who should have died a long time ago was actually not dead. Like this, it was most likely the work of those old fellows from the Dark Age. If it was Xie Tian, Xian Yuanling was not unfamiliar with him. In the boundless world, Xie Tian was someone who could almost destroy all the large powers. Muttering in a soft voice, Xian Yuanling looked at the elder in front of him and spoke in a deep voice. Focus on investigating the surrounding large powers and see who's been in contact with Xie Tian. Other than that, if you confess, we can let bygones be bygones, but if anyone deliberately hides, don't blame my sword sect for being ruthless. Since this large family had been in contact with Xie Tian, it wasn't just them. There were other powers that had been in contact with Xie Tian, so Xian Yuanling focused his investigation on these powers. First find out which powers have been in contact with Xie Tian, and then follow the clues to find where Xie Tian was hiding. The reason why he said he wouldn't pursue this matter was to make these powers take the initiative to tell the truth. If they had only been in contact with Xie Tian and helplessly provided some information, it wasn't a big deal to forgive them. But if there were people secretly colluding with Xie Tian, that was an unforgivable crime. Hearing Xian Yuanling's words, the elder respectfully replied before giving a bow and leaving the courtyard. There was a breakthrough in this matter. Although there was no concrete evidence, Xian Yuanling was at least 80% certain that the person chosen by the Dark Age was Xie Tian. First, Xie Tian was an evil cultivator. The others clearly knew the situation of the boundless world and still dared to come, so they definitely had a goal. This goal was most likely to be to fight for the position of the World Master. Only, what Xian Yuanling cared about the most right now was what kind of help the Dark Age had given Xie Tian and what kind of cultivation he had after coming back from the dead. If I remember correctly, Xie Tian should have broken through to the Ancestor Realm back then. Muttering softly, Xian Yuanling immediately sent a message to Xiao Chun. Xie Tian's appearance was not a small matter. The sword sect should follow this lead and try to find Xie Tian as soon as possible. Xiao Chun outside. After receiving Xian Yuanling's message, his expression changed. He never thought that he would find Xie Tian in the end. Without any delay, he quickly returned to the sword sect. In the sword sect's main hall, according to Xian Yuanling's orders, the sword sect's main investigation was focused on the large powers in the area. Under the investigation of the sword sect, there were indeed 7-8 powers that had secretly contacted Xie Tian. At that moment, with the return of Xiao Chun, everyone gathered together and sat on the main seat. Xiao Chun asked Xian Yuanling, who was seated below, "Are you certain that these powers have not secretly sided with Xie Tian?" After investigating these 7-8 powers, They were certain that they and Xietian had not secretly sided with Xietian. Only because of Xietian's deterrence, they had no choice but to provide some information. There were some sect masters and sect masters who wanted to report this matter to the Sword Sect, but since it involved Xietian, they were afraid that the Sword Sect would punish them, so they were hesitant. This time, Xinyuan Ling said that he would let bygones be bygones if they were willing to confess. So, the sect masters and sect masters of these 7 powers directly confessed everything. Of course, Xinyuan Ling could not just believe their side of the story. He had sent people to investigate them and found that they had not colluded with Xietian. We can be certain that there isn't. So hearing Xiao Qin's words, Xinyuan Ling simply nodded in response. These powers had not colluded with Xietian, so they could be forgiven this time. Giving a slight nod, Xiao Qin asked, "Then do you have any traces of Xietian?" Xietian's whereabouts was what Xiao Qin cared about the most. Since they were certain that Xietian was in the boundless world, then finding him was the most important problem. But Xinyuan Ling shook his head at this. The search for Xietian's whereabouts had already begun. Xinyuan Ling had used the power of the Sword Sect to search for Xietian's whereabouts in the boundless world, but up until now, there had been no news at all. Not finding any clues about Xietian made Xinyuan Ling feel very helpless. Seeing Xinyuan Ling shake his head, Xiao Qin fell into deep thought. After a while, he said to everyone present, "Then stop investigating the others. Use all your strength and dig 3 feet into the ground to find where Xietian is." Since they could basically conclude that there was no problem with Dao Xiong, Li Xiao, Dan Qinyang, and the other emperors, there was no need to continue wasting time on them. Gathering all their strength to find Xietian was the most important thing right now. Xinyuan Ling did not refuse Xiao Qin's decision. He had planned to do this anyway. At this time, it was meaningless to continue investigating Dao Xiong and the others. They would use all their strength to find Xietian's whereabouts. After everyone finished discussing this matter, Xiao Qin and Xinyuan Ling left the main hall together. Along the way, Xiao Qin looked at Xinyuan Ling with a faint smile. From this matter, Xiao Qin could clearly feel that Xinyuan Ling was very meticulous. Thinking of Li Tian's words, Xiao Qin felt a different feeling in his heart. Xiao Qin envied Cloud Palace for having an existence like Li Tian, but Li Tian had told Xiao Qin that he also had such a person by his side, but he had never noticed it. Perhaps this person was Xinyuan Ling. After being together with Xinyuan Ling for so long, Xiao Qin naturally knew that Xinyuan Ling was very intelligent, but he had never thought of Xinyuan Ling as a think tank. Perhaps it was because of their relationship. After all, Xinyuan Ling was his big brother, so Xiao Qin had subconsciously ignored this point. "Why do you keep staring at me?" Noticing Xiao Qin's gaze, Xinyuan Ling asked in a strange voice. In this regard, Xiao Qin smiled and said, "I just realized that I had always underestimated Big Brother. Big Brother can be the think tank of my sword sect." Xiao Qin's words were sincere. In this regard, Xinyuan Ling curled his lips and did not say anything. In this regard, Xiao Qin teased him with a smile. "If I knew that Big Brother was so capable, I wouldn't be so tired. However, I'll have to trouble Big Brother to worry about the sword sect in the future. Come on, this is an important matter. I'm also being forced to do something beyond my ability. This kind of thankless matter, don't look for me in the future." Hearing this, Xinyuan Ling also scolded with a smile. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of this chapter. However, there was no trace of him so far, which made everyone feel somewhat helpless. Large streets and small alleys, even going from house to house, not even letting off a normal family. But even like this, it was like Xietian had disappeared from the world. Regarding this, Wu Huan had some guesses. Do you think that Xietian has already left the Great Thousand World? Perhaps Xietian had already left the Great Thousand World. Regarding this, Xinyuan Ling shook his head and said, "It shouldn't be possible. Since Xie Tian dares to return to the Great Thousand World, how could he leave without doing anything? Xin Yuanling didn't think that Xie Tian would leave the Great Thousand World this easily. Otherwise, why would he risk coming back? Reading Book Pavilion after thinking for a bit, Xin Yuanling finally said, I think that not only the cities, we should increase our search in other places as well, including those desolate places without people. I'm afraid that will be the focus of our search. Since there were no traces of Xie Tian in the major cities, they could only increase their search range. However, everyone was a bit hesitant about this. If it's like this, then it will be much more difficult. We have to think of a way to complete it, no matter how hard it is. If we don't find Xie Tian, it will always be dangerous. Xin Yuanling replied to this. Searching the entire Great Thousand World, even searching those desolate places, this was without a doubt a large project. However, there was no other way. If they wanted to find Xie Tian, they could only do this. Xin Yuanling's order was quickly passed down, and the various major forces of the Great Thousand World once again expanded the scope of their search. Furthermore, according to Xin Yuanling's instructions, the focus of the search shifted from the various major cities to the desolate and uninhabited places. The various large powers wildly searched for Xie Tian's whereabouts, and at the same time, the evil path remnants hidden in various places began to move. These evil path remnants had used various methods to escape the large power's search. Although there weren't many of them, with Xie Tian's return, there was a fire burning in their hearts again. After all, no one wanted to live like a rat on the street. Xie Tian's return gave them a large amount of confidence, as if they could see the scene of the evil path being reborn from the ashes. These evil path cultivators also wanted to find Xie Tian and fight with him against the various large powers. However, they didn't dare show themselves now. After all, as long as they showed themselves, they would face the endless pursuit of the various large powers of the Great Thousand World. The entire vast Thousand World was currently caught in an unprecedented search. This kind of search was probably the first time it had appeared in the vast Thousand World. All the powers had joined in and could be seen everywhere. Groups of martial artists were searching for Xie Tian's whereabouts. Xie Tian naturally noticed such a large-scale search, but the current Xie Tian couldn't do anything because the 1,000 cultivators had reached the most critical moment, and Xie Tian couldn't move at all. It was still that desolate valley. Looking at the 1,000 cultivators in front of him, some of them had already broken through to the Emperor Realm, and others had just broken through to the End Realm. This was the final step, and also the most critical step. If it was destroyed now, everything would be for naught. So, even though he knew that the Sword Sect was searching for him, Xie Tian couldn't move at all. After spending this much time and energy, Xie Tian couldn't give up on these 1,000 people because they were his confidence in fighting against Shao Chun. Without these people, with just Xie Tian alone, it would be very hard for him to fight against Shao Chun and the Sword Sect. The aura of these 1,000 people, compared to a month ago, it was unknown how much stronger they were. The methods of the Dark Era had truly shocked Xie Tian. Looking at these 1,000 people, a cold light flashed in Xie Tian's eyes as he muttered, I hope there's still time. As long as these 1,000 people came out of closed-door cultivation, then even if his location was exposed, Xie Tian wouldn't be afraid. He just hoped that the people from the Sword Sect and the other large powers wouldn't find this place so quickly. Time. What Xie Tian needed right now was time. He just needed a bit more time. Chapter 26-21. Xie Tian had no way of moving right now, but the only thing worth rejoicing about was that these 1,000 people would only need a few days to come out of closed-door cultivation. Even if they were found by the Sword Sect at that time, Xie Tian would have the strength to fight them. Actually, Xie Tian was not afraid of fighting Shao Chun and the Sword Sect. Since returning to the large world and participating in the competition for the World Master position, Xie Tian knew that there would be a fight between him and Shao Chun. There was no doubt about this. Only right now, these 1,000 people had not come out of closed-door cultivation, so it was clearly not the time to fight. If the Sword Sect destroyed them at this time, These 1,000 people would all die. Although the Dark Era's methods were strange, they had their own weaknesses. During this process, no one could disturb them. What the evil spirits lacked the most right now was time, but the Sword Sect was approaching step by step, and the entire large world was searching for him. If this continued, it would only be a matter of time before they found this place. He secretly prayed in his heart, but Xietian also knew that he was lying to himself. He had to think of a way to stall for time. Otherwise, if these 1,000 people couldn't come out, all his plans would be for naught. To stall for time, Xietian actually didn't have any other choice. The only thing he could do was to use himself as bait. Only then would he be able to stall for time. To put it bluntly, Xietian would take the initiative to expose himself and attract the attention of the Sword Sect. When the time came, the Sword Sect would not pay attention to anything else. But like this, the danger was still very large. But based on the current situation, Xietian did not have any other choice. If these 1,000 people were found by the Sword Sect before they came out, everything would be for naught. Thinking of this, Xietian also stood up and disappeared on the spot. The Sword Sect's search continued, and they were getting closer and closer to the valley Xietian was in. Not long after leaving the valley, Xietian met a group of Sword Sect disciples. There was a deacon leading them, and there weren't many of them, only around 10 people in total. At this time, the 10 Sword Gate disciples were searching for Xietian's whereabouts while chatting with each other. You're saying that Xietian will be in these places? This place is deserted. Not many people come here at all. Who knows? But this is the sect master's order. We can only carry it out. As he spoke, an indifferent voice came from the front. Are you looking for me? With these words, Xietian's figure appeared out of thin air in front of everyone. Towards Xietian, these Sword Sect disciples were not unfamiliar with him. In each of their hands, there was a portrait of Xietian. All of a sudden, everyone's expression changed drastically. The deacon in the lead immediately took out his voice-transmitting talisman and prepared to send the news back to the Sword Sect. Regarding this, Xietian did not stop him. After all, his goal was to use himself to draw away the Sword Sect members. When the deacon used his voice-transmitting talisman, Xietian revealed a faint smile and made his move. He easily killed this group of Sword Sect disciples. Xietian had finally appeared. In the Sword Sect, after Xian Yuanling received this news, he immediately told Shao Chun. Regarding this, Shao Chun immediately said, "I'll personally go. Other than that, I'll have the others seal off the area. We can't let him escape." To deal with Xietian, Shao Chun had to personally go. Although he couldn't confirm Xietian's current cultivation, Shao Chun estimated that he was at least in the Ancestor Realm. Facing an Ancestor Realm expert like Xietian, the other members of the Sword Sect were definitely not his match. Only Shao Chun and Jun Wuya could fight him. Shao Chun personally left the Sword Sect and rushed to where Xietian had appeared. At the same time, the experts of the Sword Sect kept gathering there. Only, Xietian was not waiting in the same place. After killing this group of Sword Sect disciples, in just a day, Xietian appeared in another city 10,000 miles away and directly destroyed it. Xietian did not have any intentions of hiding his whereabouts, and his actions were incomparably high profile. Destroying a city was without a doubt telling the Sword Sect where he was. Following Xietian's movements, the Sword Sect members gradually formed an encirclement. But before this encirclement could be formed, Xietian was already prepared to break out. Naturally, it was impossible for him to be surrounded by the Sword Sect since he was alone. If he was surrounded by the Sword Sect, even Xietian would be in danger. Xietian's goal was to pin down the Sword Sect. Otherwise, the Sword Sect would have the time to pay attention to other places, giving the 1,000 people enough time to escape. He wanted to break out of the encirclement. The Qinling Mountain Range was an important part of the encirclement, so naturally there were experts of the Sword Sect guarding it. Song Xing and Zhou Song were personally guarding it. On this day, Song Xing and Zhou Song had just finished a night of cultivation when a terrifying pressure appeared in the sky. The two of them did not have time to think as they charged into the sky. At the same time, there were many sword sect disciples. The one who had come was Xie Tian. Seeing Xie Tian, Song Xing and Zhou Song's faces sank, but Xie Tian revealed a cold smile as he said, "Song Xing, Zhou Song, ha ha." It was a simple, cold smile, but the killing intent in his voice was self-evident. Hearing this, Song Xing and Zhou Song did not dare act carelessly. Although the two of them were Emperor Realm Masters, Xie Tian's strength could not be compared to theirs. Xie Tian chose to break out of the Qinling mountain range because he was not willing to let the sword sect completely surround him. Xie Tian wanted to use his flexibility to keep the sword sect's strength tied down, making it impossible for the sword sect to surround him. Song Xing and Zhou Song had obviously guessed Xie Tian's intentions. At this time, Song Xing sent a message to Zhou Song. "Delay him. Sect Master will definitely arrive in the time it takes to brew a cup of tea." Xiao Chun had naturally been chasing after Xie Tian these past few days, but unfortunately, Xiao Chun did not have a way to accurately pinpoint Xie Tian's position, so he was always a step behind. This time, facing the sword sect's encirclement, Xie Tian could only take the risk of breaking out. Song Xing and Zhou Song's mission was to delay him. It wouldn't take long, just the time it takes to brew a cup of tea. When that time came, Xiao Chun would naturally arrive. Seeing that the two of them had no intention of making a move, Xie Tian knew that they wanted to stall for time. So without any hesitation, Xie Tian made the first move. "You want to stall for time, but it's a pity that your strength is still a bit lacking." Directly sending out a punch, the pressure of an ancestor realm cultivation erupted. Just facing Xie Tian's pressure alone, Song Xing and Zhou Song felt their scalps tingle. But right now, it was impossible for the two of them to retreat, so facing Xie Tian's punch, the two of them could only use all their strength to block it. Seeking collection, seeking monthly votes, seeking recommendation. This chapter ends. Chapter 26-22. Song Xing and Zhou Song definitely wouldn't back down. If Xie Tian escaped, it would be even more troublesome to find him in the future. So facing Xie Tian's punch, the two of them could only grit their teeth and fight to the death. Song Xing and Zhou Song definitely wouldn't back down. If Xie Tian escaped, it would be even more troublesome to find him in the future. So facing Xie Tian's punch, the two of them could only grit their teeth and fight to the death. The news had already been sent to Xiao Chun, so as long as Xiao Chun rushed over, there would be nothing left for them to do. Seeing the two of them actually want to fight him head-on, Xie Tian gave a cold snort. Humph! Mayflies trying to shake a tree, seeking death. Xie Tian's current cultivation had definitely reached the ancestor realm. It was different from Hermit Mo's previous methods, which made Xie Tian look like he was just a facade and even wasted his innate potential. The methods of those old fellows from the Dark Era were naturally not something Hermit Mo could compare to. With the help of those old fellows from the Dark Era, Xie Tian could be said to have been refined from inside out, completely different from before. It was because of this that Xie Tian had the confidence to fight for the position of World Master with Xiao Chun. At this moment, facing Song Xing and Zhou Song's obstruction, Xie Tian did not hide the killing intent in his heart. In his eyes, Song Xing and Zhou Song were mayflies trying to shake a tree, not knowing life and death. Trifling Emperor Realm cultivators daring to block him. What was this if not seeking death? Sending out a punch. Even if Song Xing and Zhou Song worked together, when the attacks of the three collided, it was clear that Song Xing and Zhou Song did not have the ability to block Xie Tian's punch at all. The gap between the two sides was very large, so large that it was already exaggerated. Facing this, Zhou Song angrily roared, attack together and block him. The two of them had underestimated the strength of an Ancestor Realm Master. It was very difficult for the two of them to block Xie Tian, so there was no other way. They could only have the surrounding sword sect members attack together and gather everyone's strength. Only then would they have a chance of stalling Xie Tian. Hearing Zhou Song's words, the surrounding sword sect disciples, elders, and deacons all attacked together. Gathering everyone's strength, they finally blocked Xie Tian's attack. But even like this, when this attack fell, there were still quite a few people from the sword sect who had fallen. But this was already a very good result. After all, everyone had successfully blocked Xie Tian's attack. But this was only the beginning. Seeing his attack being blocked, Xie Tian's face became even more gloomy. He knew Cang Xing and Zhou Song's goal, so Xie Tian did not have much time to waste. He had to break out of the encirclement before Xiao Chen arrived. Otherwise, the situation would become even more disadvantageous for him. Xie Tian currently wanted to deal with the sword sect and not fight to the death with the sword sect. So, for the current situation, Xie Tian did not have any intention of facing Xiao Chen. After all, Xiao Chen was not a crooked melon. Even if he had been reborn, if he faced Xiao Chen, to be honest, Xie Tian did not have any confidence in winning. Thinking of this, Xie Tian did not give Cang Xing, Zhou Song, and the others a chance to breathe. He attacked wave after wave, not holding back at all. Even if they gathered everyone's strength, facing Xie Tian's wild attacks, they soon found it hard to hold on. The strength of an Ancestor Realm Master was not something that could be defeated by numbers. Of course, if there were over 100 Emperor Realm Masters attacking together without any fear of death, there might be a chance. The unique Chinese network, however, this was only a possibility. Even if they succeeded in the end, at least half of the 100 Emperor Realm Masters would be killed. Not to mention, there were only 2 Emperor Realm Masters, Cang Xing and Zhou Song. As for the others, they could be ignored, and there was no need to care about them at all. The line of defense had been forcibly torn apart by Xie Tian, and Cang Xing and Zhou Song were vomiting blood from the corners of their mouths. Their auras were chaotic, as if they had been seriously injured. Seeing that Cang Xing and Zhou Song were seriously injured, Xie Tian was even more unforgiving. He rushed forward, wanted to kill the 2 of them in one fell swoop. Xie Tian was not unfamiliar with the 2 of them, knowing that they were the mainstays of the sword sect. If he could kill the 2 of them, it would be a big blow to the sword sect. Seeing Xie Tian rush forward, a terrifying pressure enveloped the 2 of them, not giving them any chance to break free. For a moment, Cang Xing and Zhou Song were powerless to resist. The 2 of them could only accept the result of being killed by Xie Tian. However, just as Xie Tian was about to attack and the 2 of them were about to be killed, a sword slashed out and successfully blocked Xie Tian's attack, saving Cang Xing and Zhou Song in the nick of time. Xie Tian, you really made it difficult for me to find you. Along with the sword, a cold laugh came from the sky and a black figure flew over. The person who came was no one else but Xiao Chen. After receiving Cang Xing's message, Xiao Chen had immediately rushed over. In order to save time, Xiao Chen had come alone and did not bring anyone else. He wanted to kill Cang Xing and Zhou Song, but who would have thought that Xiao Chen would catch up in the end? Seeing the safe and sound Cang Xing and Zhou Song, Xie Tian's expression became very ugly. At this time, he still had a chance to kill the 2 of them, but once he did, he would be entangled by Xiao Chen. It would not be easy for him to escape at that time. Once he couldn't escape immediately, the sword sect's people would definitely surround him. Even if Xie Tian wasn't afraid of fighting Xiao Chen, one couldn't forget that the sword sect still had Jun Wuya. If Jun Wuya came, Xie Tian really didn't have any confidence in fighting 1 against 2. Using his life to exchange for Cang Xing and Zhou Song's lives, or letting them go for now, this choice for Xie Tian was not hard at all. So, without any hesitation, Xie Tian gave up on making a move against Zhou Song and Xie Tian. With a flash, he wildly ran out of the encirclement. Xie Tian naturally wasn't willing to gamble. After all, killing Cang Xing and Zhou Song didn't mean much to Xie Tian. As long as Xiao Chen didn't die, the sword sect wouldn't fall. So, Xie Tian wouldn't put himself in danger because of Cang Xing and Zhou Song. Seeing Xie Tian quickly running away, Xiao Chen didn't stop at all as he chased after him. At the same time, he shouted in a cold voice, "Xie Tian, do you think you can still run this time? I want to see just how many lives you have to die." Xie Tian was indeed like a cockroach that couldn't be killed. From the first war between good and evil to the second war between good and evil, Xietian had already died twice, but he always came back from the dead, especially this time. Even though Tian's punishment had already killed him, who would have thought that he still wasn't dead? Xiaochen admired Xietian's tenacious vitality, but so what? No matter how many lives Xietian had, this time, Xiaochen wouldn't give him a chance to come back from the dead. He would consign him to eternal damnation this time. Chapter 26-23. After Xiaochen arrived, Xietian's first reaction was to run away. He was even disinclined to pay attention to Cang Xing and Zhou Song. Seeing this, Xiaochen naturally would not let Xietian leave this easily. He also did not care about the injuries of Cang Xing and Zhou Song as he chased after Xietian. After learning that the person chosen by the Dark Era was Xietian, the killing intent in Xiaochen's heart was very strong. This was because to Xiaochen, Xietian's threat was much bigger than the others. So even if there was only a trace of a chance, Xiaochen would use all his strength to kill Xietian. He would not give him any chance to make a comeback. Xietian could already be considered an old enemy, and this fellow's life was very hard. He also had many methods, so this kind of threat had to be killed in the cradle. Xietian was very fast, and Xiaochen was moving as fast as he could. The two of them, one in front and one behind, instantly moved very far away. Seeing Xiaochen chasing after him, Xietian's face was very dark. Seeing the two of them getting closer and closer, how could Xietian not know what Xiaochen was thinking? Seeing Xiaochen like this, he was determined to kill him. Even if he had to pay a price, Xiaochen would not hesitate at all. Xiaochen was indeed thinking like this. In order to kill Xietian, Xiaochen was willing to pay a price. Even if the price was very serious, so what? As long as he could kill Xietian, it was all worth it. The distance between them closed step by step. When Xietian entered Xiaochen's attack range, Xiaochen did not hesitate to send out a slash with his sword. The tip of the slash flew out, aiming at Xietian's back. Feeling the dense killing intent coming from behind him, Xietian had no choice but to dodge to the side. After all, Xietian did not have the courage to ignore Xiaochen's attack. If he was hit by Xiaochen's sword, Xietian would be heavily injured. It was also because of this dodge that Xietian's speed became much slower. Xiaochen seized this chance and directly jumped forward, successfully catching up to Xietian. Moreover, he launched an attack without any explanation. "I already said that you won't be able to leave today," he said coldly. His hands did not stop attacking. Faced with Xiaochen's attack, Xietian saw that there was no hope of escaping, so he could only make a move to resist. The two of them instantly began to fight. Meeting again, Xiaochen was no longer the brat from before. Xiaochen's cultivation was the same as Xietian's, reaching the ancestor realm. Facing an opponent that Qinjin could only look up to, Xiaochen could already fight with him. Under Xiaochen's fierce attacks, Xietian was at a disadvantage for a while. The main reason was because Xietian did not have any intention of fighting to the death with Xiaochen right now. Those over 1,000 cultivators had not come out yet, and Xietian did not want to be entangled with Xiaochen at this time. Moreover, what Xietian was most worried about was the other ancestor realm expert in the sword sect, which was Xiaochen's master, Junwuya. Although Junwuya had not appeared yet, Xietian could not ignore him. Once Junwuya arrived, Xietian would not be able to deal with two ancestor realm experts at the same time. There were also so many experts in the Sword's Gate. Although these experts wouldn't enter Xietian's eyes under normal circumstances, now that Xiaochen and Junwu were holding them back, if Xietian still had to divert his attention to deal with the other people in the Sword's Gate, it would simply be seeking death. 61 mini ants can bite an elephant to death. These words were not empty words. Not to mention the fact that the Sword Sect could become the ruler of the boundless world. How could they lack experts? If these people all charged at him, even Xietian would find it hard to fight against them with two fists. It was because of this that Xietian did not want to fight to the death with Xiaochen at this time. If he wanted to fight against Shao Chun and the Sword Sect, Xie Tian was very clear that he could only rely on those over 1,000 cultivators. Only when they came out of seclusion and he had a group of people under him could he fight against the alliance. As for now, with just Xie Tian alone, it was indeed hard for him to fight alone. Xie Tian wanted to avoid this fight, but Shao Chun did not give him a chance. After entangling Xie Tian, Shao Chun's attacks could be said to be very fierce, as if he would not stop until he died. Under Shao Chun's wild attacks, it could be said that Xie Tian was suffering. He wanted to escape, but he did not have a chance, and Shao Chun did not give him a chance. There were many times when Shao Chun did not hesitate to exchange injuries to keep Xie Tian here. To Shao Chun, even if they were both injured, as long as Xie Tian did not have a chance to escape, it would be his gain. After all, as long as Xie Tian did not have a chance to escape, once the other members of the Sword Sect and Jun Wuya arrived, Xie Tian would be dead without a doubt. Shao Chun's idea was very simple, which was to keep Xie Tian here no matter what. Regarding this, Xie Tian did not dare exchange injuries with Shao Chun. Like this, Xie Tian would not be able to display his full strength. With this, Shao Chun slowly took the initiative. Being suppressed by Shao Chun, Xie Tian's heart was depressed, but there was nothing he could do. As the fight continued, the killing intent in Shao Chun's eyes became stronger and stronger. The sword in his hand did not stop at all, not giving Xie Tian any chance to catch his breath. Damn! Cursing in his heart, Xie Tian saw that Shao Chun's fighting spirit was getting stronger and stronger, and his situation was getting worse and worse. As time passed, Xie Tian didn't know when the other masters of the Sword Gate would arrive. He had to think of a way to escape as soon as possible. His eyes were ice cold, and in that instant, Xie Tian made a decision in his heart. Being delayed by Shao Chun like this, the result would definitely not be good. So, Xie Tian also made a decision. Although it was a bit painful, there was no other way. With things like this, he could only do this. With a thought, he communicated with the black token in his storage ring. This black token was given to him by those old fellows from the Dark Era. There was only one, but it could save Xie Tian's life at a critical moment. This black token, those old fellows from the Dark Era had already said that unless they met a world master, no one could destroy it. This was what Xie Tian had always relied on. He thought that he would save this token for the most critical moment to give it to senior brother, but who would have thought that he would have to use it at the beginning? His only life-saving treasure was about to be used now. Xie Tian's heart ached, but there was no other way. Looking at Shao Chun, the killing intent in his eyes became even stronger. Xie Tian spoke in a cold voice. Shao Chun, don't be happy too early. This is only the beginning. Chapter 26-24. He didn't have time to waste with Shao Chun. He didn't know when the experts of the Sword Sect would arrive. If he was surrounded by the experts of the Sword Sect, it would be even harder to escape. So, Xie Tian made his decision and used the black token, the only life-saving treasure those old fellows from the Dark Era had given him. As soon as his voice fell, the black token was directly crushed by Xie Tian. At the same time, a black light fell from the sky and covered Xie Tian's body. Seeing this, Shao Chun naturally wasn't willing to let Xie Tian leave like this, so he immediately made his move. However, facing Shao Chun's attack, the black light wasn't affected at all. It didn't even create a single ripple. It seemed like it was like those old fellows from the Dark Era said. Unless the World Master personally made a move, no one could break this black token. Xie Tian's heart calmed down, and he looked at Shao Chun with a dark expression as he spoke in a cold voice. Shao Chun, don't be happy too early. The fight between the two of us has only just begun. Running away this time, Xie Tian was also considering the big picture. It didn't mean that Xie Tian didn't have the strength to fight Shao Chun. For Xie Tian, what he really needed to do right now was to close up those 1,000 people. As soon as his voice fell, the black light slowly dissipated and Xie Tian's figure disappeared along with it. Looking at Xie Tian with killing intent, in the end, When Xie Tian's figure completely disappeared on the spot, Xiao Chun couldn't feel any aura at all. Xie Tian's method indeed made Xiao Chun unable to do anything. Their auras had completely disappeared, and Xiao Chun couldn't stop it at all. Watching Xie Tian escape in front of him again, Xiao Chun was indeed a bit angry, but he couldn't do anything. Thinking about it, it was clear that this was a life-saving method those old fellows from the Dark Era gave Xie Tian. Xiao Chun naturally didn't have much confidence against those old guys from the Dark Age. After all, even Lin Yun's tone was filled with fear when she talked about the Dark Age. He had missed the best chance to kill Xie Tian. Although Xiao Chun didn't know what other tricks Xie Tian had, Xiao Chun was certain that Xie Tian wasn't as simple as he seemed on the surface. In the dark, Xie Tian must have made some preparations, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to compete with him. With just Xie Tian alone, even if he was a genuine Ancestor Realm expert, wanting to fight the entire sword sect by himself was an impossible and unrealistic matter. A cold glint flickered in his eyes. At the same time, Nangongguan, Long Qing, and the others also arrived. Their speed was naturally slower than Xiao Chen's, so they were a bit slower. When everyone arrived, they found that Xie Tian's figure had already disappeared. There was no need to ask. Xie Tian must have run away. Xiao Chun didn't hide this and said with a helpless smile, he had the life-saving treasure on him. Xie Tian indeed relied on the black token to escape. Otherwise, with Xie Tian's strength, even if he wanted to leave, he wouldn't be able to do it so easily. Xiao Chun would definitely make him pay a price. At that time, even if Xie Tian could escape, he would definitely be injured. Only, with the life-saving treasure those old fellows from the Dark Era gave him, Xiao Chun really wouldn't be able to do anything to him for now. Hearing Xiao Chun's words, Long Qing comforted him. A stray dog, he can't jump around for long. Long Qing's words were clearly meant to comfort Xiao Chun, but Xiao Chun shook his head and said with a faint smile, the longer it drags on, the more dangerous it is. Xie Tian definitely has other preparations. I always felt that he took the initiative to appear this time to stall for time. He had always been hiding in the dark, but Xie Tian had suddenly appeared this time with such great fanfare. Xiao Chun had already suspected that this fellow wanted to stall for time. Otherwise, with Xie Tian's personality and intelligence, it was impossible for him to not know that he couldn't fight the sword sect with just his strength. It was also impossible for him to recklessly expose himself like this. So, Xiao Chun always suspected that Xie Tian had deliberately exposed himself. As for the reason, Xiao Chun didn't know for now. But no matter what the reason was, the longer it dragged on, the greater the threat Xie Tian posed. Not only Xiao Chun, even Long Qing and the others were clear on this point. But there was no other way. If they let Xie Tian escape this time, it wouldn't be easy to find him again. Moreover, the most important problem was that the things Xie Tian had prepared behind the scenes, Xiao Chun didn't have any information on when they would succeed. As soon as his voice fell, he saw everyone's faces turn serious. Xiao Chun said with a smile, all right, we'll deal with it as it comes. Let's go back first. They didn't stop searching for Xie Tian. As long as Xie Tian didn't die, Xiao Chun and the sword sect wouldn't be at ease. But without any clues, Xiao Chun didn't know where to start, so he could only return to the sword sect first. Of course, the most important thing was to discuss with Xianyuan Ling Nangongguan, Wu Huan, Lin Qing, and the others were still searching for Xie Tian. Xiao Chun and Long Qing returned to the sword sect with Song Xing and Zhou Song. The two of them were heavily injured and had almost died at Xie Tian's hands. They didn't have any battle strength for now, so Xiao Chun brought them back to the sword sect to rest. Once they returned to the sword sect, Xiao Chun immediately went to find Xianyuan Ling. Since the matter with Xie Tian, Xianyuan Ling had been in charge of the sword sect, taking care of all the small and large matters. However, when these heavenly planned palace disciples entered the valley, they immediately noticed something strange. The entire valley was filled with blood pools of different sizes, and these blood pools were almost dried up. At the same time, there was a figure sitting cross-legged in each blood pool. These people are the missing cultivators, the leader of the Heavenly Plan Palace said. Then, without thinking too much, he took out a voice transmission talisman and directly sent the news back to the Heavenly Plan Palace. They didn't expect that the 1,000 over-cultivators, that so many powers were searching for would actually appear here. They had unintentionally made a great contribution. It was a pity that this contribution was only a contribution, but they didn't have a life to enjoy it. This was because when the Heavenly Plan Palace Deacon took out a voice transmission talisman to contact the Heavenly Plan Palace, the figures in the blood pools suddenly opened their eyes. Instantly, several terrifying auras soared into the sky. End Realm. The few people who woke up were all at the End Realm. Moreover, they weren't at the initial End Realm. They were at least at the small perfection End Realm. Feeling the terrifying pressure, the deacon's face sunk. He was prepared to order everyone to escape, but unfortunately, before he could say anything, a bloodlight flashed and directly pierced through his forehead. Killed in one strike. As the deacon fell, the fate of the remaining Heavenly Plan Palace disciples was obvious. With their strength, how could they deal with a few End Realm cultivators? It was a one-sided massacre. Not long later, the valley was filled with corpses. The Heavenly Plan Palace disciples were all killed on the spot, without exception. Chapter 26:26. This group of Heavenly Policy Mansion disciples was lucky enough to find these cultivators. However, it was also because of this that they seemed to have opened the door to hell. Who would have thought that these cultivators with ordinary strength, cultivation, and talent would transform into End Realm experts in such a short period of time? An End Realm expert, even in the Heavenly Policy Mansion, was an existence that could become an elder. Due to the changes in the era, the martial path of the Great Thousand World had improved a lot, and it could even be said that it had completed a brand new transformation. The most obvious change was naturally the appearance of Ancestor Realm experts. However, even so, End Realm cultivators still couldn't be underestimated in the Great Thousand World. After all, under normal circumstances, cultivators who could reach the End Realm could be considered a big figure. Before they died, this group of Heavenly Policy Palace disciples seemed to have seen the cultivators who attacked them. Their cultivations were probably not outstanding among the 1,000 or so people here, because several of them had clearly reached the Emperor Realm. What kind of method could make these cultivators with ordinary talent and no background, not to mention having a deep foundation, transform into End Realm and Emperor Realm experts? Such a terrifying increase was unbelievable. However, the only fortunate thing was that the news had been successfully sent back to Heavenly Policy Mansion. At this time, Heavenly Policy Mansion should have already reported this matter to the Sword Sect. Finally, they found the whereabouts of more than 1,000 warriors. The Heavenly Policy Mansion and the Swords Gate reacted very quickly. They immediately sent the news to the Swords Gate. At the same time, Xianyuan Ling, who was in the Swords Gate, immediately informed Xiao Chun. After receiving the news, Xiao Chun hurried over and asked as soon as he saw Xianyuan Ling there's news. But seems like we're still a step too late, Xianyuan Ling nodded and replied. They had indeed found the whereabouts of these 1,000 people, but from the current information, it seemed like they were still a bit late. Xie Tian had used some unknown method to turn these people into experts. The group of Heavenly Policy Mansion disciples that discovered these people were instantly killed. Xianyuan Ling's guess was right. Xie Tian must have obtained some method from Heavenly Policy Mansion, which was why he could raise the strength of these 1,000 people to such a level in such a short period of time. Although he didn't know if this method had any side effects, no matter what, these 1,000 people couldn't be treated lightly. It could even be said that they would become a huge problem for the Sword Sect. They were also Xie Tian's greatest reliance to fight against the Sword Sect. When he received the news, Xianyuan Ling understood why Xie Tian had purposely exposed his whereabouts. Perhaps it was to buy time for these 1,000 people. At that time, these 1,000 people should still be in closed-door cultivation. So, Xietian did not hesitate to use himself as bait to divert the attention of the sword sect. If they could find the whereabouts of these 1,000 people a bit earlier, the sword sect would have been able to exterminate them in the cradle. But it was a pity that they were a step too late, which made people very angry. Hearing Xin Yuanling's words and seeing his disappointed expression, Xiao Chan said with a calm smile, "There's no need to be too conflicted. There is no perfect thing in this world. Since we're a step late, then it's too late. But at least we've found their whereabouts, right?" Xiao Chen was quite optimistic. It was fine if they were a step late. Anyway, there would be a battle that couldn't be avoided, so they would just deal with whatever came. Seeing Xiao Chen's calm appearance, Xin Yuanling helplessly shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "Then what do we do now? What else can we do? We'll make the first move and directly fight with Xietian." Hearing this, Xiao Chan said with a smile. But this time, Xin Yuanling had a different opinion. Although he had complained before, Xin Yuanling was very clear that these size wouldn't change anything. So, from the beginning, Xin Yuanling had been thinking of countermeasures. And now, Xin Yuanling already had a relatively perfect plan in his mind. While Xin Yuanling and Xiao Chan were discussing how to deal with the situation in the valley, after the Heavenly Policy Mansion disciples were killed, the 1,000 cultivators came out of their cultivation one after another. The methods of the Dark Age were indeed unfathomable. These 1,000 ordinary rogue cultivators seemed to have become completely different people under this method. They had undergone a qualitative change from the inside out. Their cultivation had definitely increased. At this time, among the 1,000 or so people, dozens of them had already reached the Emperor Realm, and a few of them had even reached the Peak Emperor Realm. As for the rest, their cultivations were almost all in the End Realm. This kind of power was already comparable to the Sword Sect. In the entire Sword Sect, even if they took out all their trump cards, the number of masters they had would probably be around these few. No wonder Xietian had so much confidence in these 1,000 people. However, after coming out of seclusion, it was unknown if they were affected by something, but these 1,000 people's expressions became extremely cold. They gave people a chill just by looking at them. As these people woke up one by one, Xietian also appeared in the valley at an unknown time. Looking at these 1,000 people who had successfully come out of seclusion, Xietian couldn't help but reveal a smile on his face. This kind of team, even the evil god palace of the past, didn't have this kind of team. With so many masters, this was Xietian's trump card against the Sword Sect. However, Xietian was very clear that all of this was given to him by the Dark Age. Since those old fellows could give him this kind of power, they would definitely have a way to take it back and return him to his original state. To put it bluntly, Xietian was clear in his heart that he was just a dog beside those old fellows from the Dark Age. Whoever they wanted him to bite, Xietian would spare no effort to bite them. But even like this, Xietian was still immersed in this kind of power and couldn't extricate himself. With this kind of power, Xietian was willing to be a dog for the Dark Age, a dog that helped them control the boundless world. Not to mention that he was a dog in front of those old fellows, but in front of others, Xietian was an unreachable existence. Adding in the fact that when these 1,000 people saw Xietian, they all respectfully called out to him, "Master!" This made Xietian's heart burn even more. His lips couldn't help revealing a smile as he softly muttered, "It's time to find a place to stay. Xiao Chun, I've already said that this is only the beginning. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. This chapter ends." Chapter 26-27. Under the temptation of power, Xietian had completely sunk into it. To be honest, Xietian enjoyed this kind of strength and wasn't willing to let it go. Under the temptation of power, Xietian had completely sunk into it. To be honest, Xietian enjoyed this kind of strength and wasn't willing to let it go. Looking at the 1,000 warriors in front of him, each one of them had become extremely powerful, and this was all given to him by the Dark Era. With this group of people, Xietian was confident that he could contend against the Sword Sect and Shao Chun. With a confident smile on his face, Xietian waved his hand, and everyone quickly left the valley. It was like Xietian had said, it was time to find a place to settle down. Now was the time to face the Sword Gate. This valley wasn't far from the Sword Sect. After Xietian's group left, what was strange was that the Sword Sect didn't appear. Logically speaking, after discovering the intentions of Xietian and the 1,000 warriors, the Sword Sect should have chosen to surround and annihilate them. But this time, the Sword Sect didn't do so. Was the Sword Sect afraid? Obviously not. The real reason was Xianyuan Ling and Shao Chun. Because Shao Chun didn't give the order, his subordinates naturally wouldn't make a move. At this moment, Shao Chun and Xianyuan Ling were sitting together. After hearing Xianyuan Ling's words, Shao Chun said with some hesitation, "Wouldn't this be a little? Don't worry, I will arrange everything. Third brother, don't worry. We will just be a step slower. Since things are already like this, we can borrow Xietian's hands to solve the problem that third brother has always wanted to solve." Xianyuan Ling said with a smile. Hearing Xianyuan Ling's words, Shao Chun was silent for a moment before nodding. "All right, then it's up to you." Shao Chun didn't reject Xianyuan Ling's plan. Xianyuan Ling smiled and didn't say anything else. With Shao Chun's personality, it wasn't suitable for him to deal with this matter. So, as Shao Chun's big brother, Xianyuan Ling could only personally sweep away all the obstacles. Xianyuan Ling's idea was very simple. Since the 1,000 warriors had successfully come out, Xietian would definitely make a move soon. Xietian's first target wouldn't be the Sword Sect. He should be looking for a place to stay in the boundless world. In this kind of place, the best choice was naturally the other large forces. After all, as long as they captured them, everything would be ready. Xietian had over 1,000 warriors under him. They wouldn't be afraid of fighting with the Sword Sect. So, Xianyuan Ling's idea was to let Xietian attack these forces, and then at the final moment, the Sword Sect would make a move and save them. At that time, they could officially merge these forces into the Sword Sect, including Dao Ju, Xiao Xiao, Li Chun, and the others. These people were people that Shao Chun wanted to absorb into the Sword Sect, and they would become the cornerstones of the Sword Sect in the future. Only he didn't have a chance to show it, so it was delayed until now. Now that he finally had a chance, Xianyuan Ling naturally wouldn't miss it. Anyway, he couldn't avoid fighting Xietian, so it was better to think of a way to obtain some benefits. Shao Chun agreed to Xianyuan Ling's plan, so the Sword Sect didn't immediately make a move. Xietian did what Xianyuan Ling thought and directly targeted the Saber Sect. The Saber Sect was one of the 10 great heaven-ascending sects in the past. Although it couldn't compare to the Sword Sect now, if he took down the Saber Sect, Xietian would have a place to stay in the boundless world and would have a foundation. Like this, he would be able to compete with the Sword Sect. Xietian's thoughts were completely guessed by Xianyuan Ling, but the Sword Sect still didn't have any intentions of helping. The time wasn't right yet. Riding brush house with the Saber Sect's strength, it was impossible for them to deal with Xietian's group. Not to mention the 1,000 cultivators, because the methods of the Dark Era could not be compared to the past. Just the Ancestor Realm expert Xietian was not something the Saber Sect could contend against. They headed straight for the Saber Sect. At the same time, inside the Saber Sect, Dao Ju and Dao Xiong were still talking about Xietian. Looking at his son, Dao Xiong said, "Who would have thought that Xietian would come back from the dead? Moreover, he is much stronger than before. He is also a person with great luck." Isn't that nonsense? If he didn't have great luck, how could he compete with Shao Chun for the position of World Master? Hearing this, Dao Ju said with a smile. Dao Xiong asked curiously, "Between Shao Chun and Xietian, who do you think will win?" The matter of Xietian and Shao Chun competing for the position of World Master was no secret in the boundless world. Dao Xiong was naturally curious as to who would win in the end. Although Shao Chun's performance was enough to make people gasp in surprise, Xietian was clearly not a simple person. He died again and again, but he came back from the dead again and again. It was as if Xietian could fight for a chance of survival each time. Faced with his father's question, Dao Ju curled his lips and said, based on the current situation, Xiao Chun has a higher chance of winning. Moreover, I also hope that the final winner will be Xiao Chun. I think Father also doesn't want the position of World Master to fall into Xie Tian's hands. From the bottom of their hearts, Dao Xiong and Dao Ju definitely hoped that Xiao Chun would win. Most people in the boundless world probably thought the same. After all, in terms of prestige, Xiao Chun definitely surpassed Xie Tian. Xie Tian's reputation in the boundless world was not good. Just his identity as an evil martial artist was enough to make many people dislike him. Hearing Dao Ju's words, Dao Xiong smiled and didn't say anything. However, at this moment, a terrifying pressure suddenly appeared in the sky above the Saber sect. This pressure was like a mountain fiercely pressing down, enveloping the entire Saber sect. Feeling the appearance of this terrifying pressure, Dao Xiong and Dao Ju's expressions changed. They looked up at the sky at the same time. At the same time, figures appeared in the sky. Xie Tian. With a single glance, Dao Xiong saw Xie Tian in front of the crowd, as well as the thousands of martial artists beside him. Xie Tian's arrival was something that Dao Xiong never expected. He never thought that Xie Tian would actually target the Saber sect. Dao Xiong didn't want to guess Xie Tian's intentions. In any case, he definitely didn't come with good intentions. As expected, after Xie Tian appeared, he spoke in an indifferent voice. Dao Xiong, submit to this lord, and this lord can guarantee you a lifetime of wealth and glory. Xie Tian's first words were to make Dao Xiong submit. Hearing this, Dao Xiong's face sank. The disciples, attendants, and elders of the Saber sect all looked as if they were facing a great enemy. It could be said that they were not prepared at all. The Saber sect was completely unprepared for the sudden appearance of Xie Tian's group. However, Xie Tian was filled with confidence. The confidence in his words was telling Dao Xiong a fact. Either submit or die. With the support of everyone's spiritual energy, the sect protecting array quickly stabilized, but Xie Tian's expression didn't change at all. He just softly said, a final struggle. It was indeed a final struggle. Gathering the strength of the entire Saber sect, they could indeed stall for some time, but that was all. It was impossible to stop Xie Tian at all. Xie Tian clearly didn't have any intentions of stalling for time. He directly said to the people beside him, let's attack together and break this laughable turtle shell. After saying this, Xie Tian took the lead to attack. At the same time, the 1,000 cultivators beside him also attacked. Instantly, all kinds of martial skills wildly exploded in the sky above the Saber sect. The Saber sect protecting array was also in imminent danger. Especially the disciples of the Saber sect. They were all injured by this terrifying power. Indeed, they couldn't hold on for long. Right now, Dao Xiong was also doing his best to maintain the array. The sect protecting array was Dao Xiong's only support, but based on the current situation, it wouldn't be able to last for long. I hope we can make it in time. He could only silently pray in his heart. While the Saber sect was in imminent danger, at the same time, in the Sword sect, Xin Yuanling naturally received a letter from the Dao Ju. The contents of the letter were very simple. It was a request for help. After receiving the letter, Xin Yuanling looked at Nangong Guan in front of him. He said to Zhou Song and the others with a smile, it seems like the Saber sect situation isn't good. Is there even a need to say that? The Saber sect can't stop Xie Tian. Hearing this, Nangong Guan said with a bit of displeasure. It was very clear that Nangong Guan didn't understand Xin Yuanling's actions. In Nangong Guan's eyes, Xin Yuanling still wanted to scheme against the Saber sect and the Moon Palace at this time. He wanted to borrow Xie Tian's hand to obtain more benefits. With Nangong Guan's personality, Xin Yuanling's actions were completely unreasonable. So she couldn't understand and naturally had some opinions about Xin Yuanling. Xin Yuanling naturally knew about this, but he didn't have any intention of explaining. There were some things that had to be done by someone. Moreover, for Xiao Chun, Xin Yuanling, was willing to take the blame. He didn't care about morality, he was ruthless, and he was extremely sinister. Xin Yuanling didn't care about this, as long as he could clear the obstacles for Xiao Chun in the future. So, after hearing Nan Gongwan's words, Xin Yuanling only revealed a faint smile. Then he asked Zhou Song to the side, "Are our people all here? They're all in position. We can make a move at any time." Hearing this, Zhou Song replied. His attitude was also a bit stiff. From the beginning, Xin Yuanling had already arranged for the sword sect's experts to rush to the saber sect. Then the two brothers sat across from each other. Xiao Chun personally made a cup of tea for Xin Yuanling and waited for the saber sect's result. With Junwia making a move, there should not be any problems. Of course, even if the saber sect suffered any losses, it was not a bad thing for the sword sect. If it was not for Xiao Chen's firm opposition, Xin Yuanling would have allowed the saber sect to be destroyed and only saved Dao Ju. It was because of Xiao Chen's opposition that Xin Yuanling changed his previous plan and chose to make a move ahead of time. The situation on the saber sect side was becoming more and more dangerous. The sect protecting array was on the verge of shattering. Many saber sect disciples, because they kept pouring their spiritual energy into the array, suffered a backlash along with the attacks of Xietian and the others and died on the spot. Every time Xietian and the others attacked, there would be saber sect disciples who would die from the backlash. Although Dao Xiong saw this, there was nothing he could do. "Are the people from the sword sect not here yet?" His eyes were filled with a cold light as he asked Dao Ju to the side. Since things had reached this point, Dao Xiong naturally felt that something was wrong. The sword sect's reaction was too abnormal. How could there be no movement after such a long time? Hearing this, Dao Ju helplessly said, "They've already replied. They said to hold on for a bit longer." Hearing Dao Ju's reply, Dao Xiong did not say anything else. He could only hold on for now. However, in this situation, how long could they hold on? There were so many disciples in the saber sect, and almost half of them had died. Moreover, this was under the protection of the sect protecting array. If there was no sect protecting array, the consequences would be hard to imagine. It was only a matter of time before the sect protecting array was broken. As more and more saber sect disciples died, the sect protecting array would be unable to hold on. At the same time, Xietian in the sky looked at the sect protecting array that was already covered in cracks and revealed a cold smile. "Dao Xiong, everything is over. Stubbornly resisting is useless." After saying this, Xietian sent out a punch. The fist glow slammed into the array, and with a crisp sound, the sect protecting array shattered. Seeing the array shatter, a look of despair flashed in Dao Xiong's eyes. Was everything going to end like this? Without the protection of the sect protecting array, what could the saber sect use to resist Xietian and the others? Xietian did not even need to take action. Just the dozens of Emperor Realm cultivators by his side were enough to destroy the saber sect. It was not only Dao Xiong who felt despair in his heart. Everyone in the saber sect who was still alive was the same. They looked at Xie Tian in the sky with terrified expressions.